Good morning. Good morning. If everyone could have their seats, we're going to go ahead and begin. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. There's one slight change to the agenda, which is we're going to have Dr. Brian King start with opening remarks, and then we'll go from there. Mute your phones, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to leave some breadcrumbs to get back to my seat. So lovely to see everyone this morning. It's a pleasure. I am Brian King. I'm the director of the Center for Tobacco Products, and appreciate everyone taking the time to be here today. I'll say that on a 96-degree DC day, there's no place I would rather be than the White Oak campus at FDA. We got some air conditioning. We've got some government-grade seating that's mildly comfortable, and a government-rate lunch that you can purchase at your own expense during the break. So great to see everyone. I know it's been a while since we convened. I do want to reinforce just the critical juncture of today's session. Of course, we know this is the first discussion of a modified risk tobacco product application renewal. So certainly a first of its kind. It's been about 4 years since we've discussed an MRTP, which of course we are required to do by the Tobacco Control Act. I know it was 4 years because I was on the committee at that time. I remember it for multiple reasons. One, it was right at the cusp of the pandemic. We just got it in, and it was also on February 14th, which totally killed my Valentine's Day dinner plan. So rest assured that will not happen again, but we definitely are at a critical juncture of the center, which also coincidentally just celebrated 15 years this past weekend. And so I appreciate everyone coming together and continuing to implement the components that Congress intended of us in the Tobacco Control Act. I'm also mindful it's been about a year since we've convened this group. Of course, folks know that we had an external evaluation in December of 2022. Seems like eons ago, but as part of the 15 recommendations, one of them was to continue to enhance the work of this critical group, which I completely and wholeheartedly agree with as someone who was on the committee for over a decade. And so we've committed to have at least one of these sessions a year. We'll aim to do more when the merits permit and allow. But I also want to note one component of that evaluation as well was our intent to expand the scope of the dialogue around this committee as well. And so frequently we're focusing on application-specific topics, but we also made a commitment to expand the scope to focus on broader level scientific issues, to capitalize on the time and expertise. And so that's exactly what we're doing today. And so this afternoon, as part of the session, there's going to be a broader level discussion around various components of consumer understanding related to modified risk tobacco products. And so I think this is a critical juncture for us to continue to expand those dialogues moving forward, and I hope that they continue, and so it's a first of many. That said, in terms of today's session, I'd like to just comment on a few higher level points, including the myriad people that come together to make this happen. One, I know we've got some folks in the audience, which is critically important. I'd like to see those numbers increase over time, but of course in a hybrid environment, we can certainly help to maximize that. But I want to thank you all for coming today. I think it's a critically important part of the work that we do in terms of tobacco product regulation to bring people to the table to participate in the regulatory process. It takes a village, and so thank you for those who are going to speak today verbally, but also those who've written comments to the docket and otherwise participated. It's a critical component of the work that we do, and it needs to continue. I also want to give a shout out to our staff at the Center for Tobacco Products. I joke frequently that tobacco product regulation is not for the weary. I'm certainly not in it for my health. I've likely lost years off my life as a result of doing this, but we have a critical purview and scope of the work that we do. That said, I want to commend our staff who are doing a hell of a job working day in and day out to conduct comprehensive scientific reviews. That's the crux of our center. That has always been the case, and that will continue. We have many of them here today, some of which will speak, but they are representative of hundreds and hundreds of staff across the center who are working tirelessly to ensure that we continue the important scientific integrity of our portfolio, including product reviews. They bring a new meaning to the word civil service, and I want to make sure that they're recognized for that work. I also want to acknowledge the committee. Having sat in this committee in the past, I know this is not glamorous work, well, I guess depending on your interpretation of glamorous, but it's an important work. And I realize that it takes a lot of time and effort and expertise, including to prepare for these sessions, and also to make sure that we have a constructive and fruitful dialogue. And so thank you for trekking up to FDA and for your continued service to not only the agency, but also to the public health of this country. And finally, I also want to acknowledge the applicant as well. I know that a lot of effort goes into these applications, and we continue to ensure that scientific integrity is utmost importance in everything we do. And so I appreciate the thoughtful presence and also the information that you'll share today to make sure that we are using science to guide our ultimate decision. So with that, I will close my bureaucratic mouthpiece, but again, I want to thank you all for being here. I unfortunately cannot stay for the duration of the session. I'll stay for about half the morning. I found I could be in 3 places at one time, but 4 is pushing it. And so I'm going to stay as long as I can, but I know you're in good hands with Serena et al., and I look forward to a productive dialogue throughout the day. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Brian, for your opening remarks. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Christine Del Nevo. I am chair of the Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee. I want to make a few opening statements, and then we will move into introducing the committee. For topics such as those being discussed at today's meeting, there are often a variety of opinions, some of which are quite strongly held. Our goal is that today's meeting will be a fair and open forum for discussion of these issues, and individuals can express their views without interruption. Thus, as a gentle reminder, individuals will be allowed to speak into the record only if recognized by the chair. We look forward to a productive meeting. In the spirit of the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government in the Sunshine Act, we ask that the advisory committee members take care that their conversations about the topic at hand take place in an open forum of the meeting. We are aware that members of the media are anxious to speak with the FDA about these proceedings. However, FDA will refrain from discussing the details of the meeting with the media until its conclusion. Also, the committee is reminded to please refrain from discussing the meeting topics during the breaks. And with that, I would like to ask the committee members, our expert consultants, as well as the FDA staff that are playing a critical role in today's meetings to introduce themselves. And we're going to start at this end of the table with Dr. Annette Kaufman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Annette Kaufman. I'm a program director and health scientist in the Tobacco Control Research Branch at the National Cancer Institute, and my role today is serving as expert consultant.
Hey, good morning. Andy Bailey, University of Kentucky Extension Tobacco Specialist, and I'm here to represent tobacco growers.
Amy Model with Vallejo Sciences, also with University of California at Davis. I'm a board-certified toxicologist, and my role is to represent small businesses in industry.
Good morning. My name is Maria Kokova, and I'm a Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer at Altria, but today I'm representing the tobacco industry.
Good morning, Taryn Watson. I work for the Indian Health Service, attending on behalf of Alberta Vicente. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Deirdre Lawrence Kittner, the Director for the Office on Smoking and Health at the Centers for Disease Control.
Hi, I'm Lisa Pastow. I'm a Program Director in the Division of Lung Diseases at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at NIH.
Good morning. Lucy Popova, Associate Professor at the School of Public Health, Georgia State University.
Adam Leventhal, Director of the University of Southern California Institute for Addiction Science.
Sven Jord, Associate Professor of Anesthesiology, Pharmacology, and Cancer Biology at Duke University School of Medicine.
Good morning, Risa Robinson. I'm a Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Rochester Institute of Technology.
Good morning, I'm Scout. My pronouns are he, they. I'm the Executive Director of the National LGBTQI Cancer Network, and I'm here representing the general public.
Hello, I'm Nancy Rigatti. I'm a Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School in Boston and the Director of the MGH Tobacco Research and Treatment Center, MGH being Massachusetts General Hospital.
Donna Upson, Professor of Medicine, University of New Mexico, adult pulmonologist at the VA.
Good morning, Olivia Wachowski, Associate Professor at Rutgers University, and I'm participating as an expert consultant.
Brian King, Director of the Center for Tobacco Products.
Good morning, I'm Ben Appleberg. I'm the Deputy Director for Regulatory Science in the Office of Science at CTP. I also wanted to let everyone know that our office director, Dr. Matthew Farley, had intended to attend today's meeting in person. Unfortunately, he's come down with COVID, so he's not going to attend in person, but he is listening in virtually and sends his regrets.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Burnett. I'm a branch chief of Social Science Branch 2 in the Office of Science at Center for Tobacco Products, and I'm the technical project lead for the review team.
Dr. Guy, you are on the line to introduce yourself.
I am, thank you. Mignon Guy, Associate Professor at the Department of African American Studies and Faculty Investigator in the Center for the Study of Tobacco Products at Virginia Commonwealth University. And my apologies that I was not able to join you in person. I had some transportation issues.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Captain Serena Hunter Thomas, and it is my pleasure to serve as the designated federal officer for this Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee, or TPSAC meeting. First, I would like to thank the many hands that were involved in the planning and preparation of this meeting leading up to today. It truly took a village, and I thank you all. Today's session will cover one topic that is open to the public in its entirety. The meeting topic is described in the Federal Register notice that was published on Monday, May 6, 2024, with an amendment that was published on Wednesday, June 12, 2024. The transcriptionist for this meeting today is Mr. Devin Gilday. I would like to remind everyone to please check your pagers and cell phones and make sure that they are either turned off or in silent mode. When making your comment, please first state your name and speak loudly and clearly for the record. We would like everyone to be heard for the benefit of all committee members, FDA staff, and public attendees here in the room, as well as those listening via webcast. I will now proceed to read the conflict of interest statement for this meeting. The Center for Tobacco Products of the Food and Drug Administration is convening today, June 26, 2024, for a meeting of the Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee under the authority of the Federal Advisory Committee Act of 1972 and the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2009. The committee is composed of scientists, healthcare professionals, a representative of a state government, a representative of the general public, ex officio participants from other agencies, and 3 industry representatives. The following information on the status of this advisory committee's compliance with applicable federal and conflict of interest laws and regulations is being provided to participants in today's meeting as well as to the public, and is available for viewing at the registration table. The purpose of today's meeting, which is being held in open session in its entirety, is to discuss the renewal of a risk modification order submitted by Swedish Match USA for loose snus and portioned snus products as itemized in the Federal Register notice. Accordingly, this meeting is categorized as a particular matter involving specific parties, or PMISP. With the exception of the industry representatives, all committee members, either special government employees or regular government employees from other agencies, are subject to federal conflict of interest laws and regulations. Based on the categorization of this meeting and the matters to be considered by the committee, all meeting participants, with the exception of the 3 industry representatives, have been screened for potential conflicts of interest. FDA has determined that the screening participants are in compliance with applicable federal conflict of interest laws and regulations. With respect to the committee's industry representatives, we would like to disclose that Doctors Maria Gagova, William Andy Bailey, and Amy Maddle are participating in this meeting as non-voting representatives from the industry. Dr. Gagova is representing the tobacco manufacturing industry. Dr. Bailey is representing the tobacco growers industry, and Dr. Maddle is representing the tobacco small business pool industry. Their role at this meeting is to represent these industries in general and not any particular company. Dr. Gagova is employed with Altria Client Services. Dr. Bailey is employed with the University of Kentucky Research and Education Center, and Dr. Maddle is employed with Vallejo Sciences. This concludes my reading of the conflict of interest statement for the public record, and at this time, I would like to hand the meeting back over to the chair, Dr. Del Nevo. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. And with that, we're going to have our first presentation. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Burnett, who is the technical project lead at FDA for the Swedish Match MRTP application.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Jennifer Burnett, and I'm the Chief of the Social Science Branch 2 in CTP's Office of Science. I'm going to present an overview of Swedish Match USA Incorporated's renewal modified risk tobacco applications currently under review. Please take a moment to read through the disclaimer on this slide. Okay, this is an outline of what I will be discussing. I will begin with the history of Swedish Match's risk modification order, including a brief overview of Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act's risk modification order standard, and details about Swedish Match's previous modified risk tobacco application, or MRTPA. Then I will move into a summary of the current renewal MRTPA under review. This summary will include details about the renewal request, FDA's post-market surveillance and studies, or PMSS requirements, and the marketing and sales landscape post-Swedish Match's risk modification order. Lastly, I will walk through the lines of evidence submitted by the applicant in support of their renewal application and the questions we are posing to the committee. When determining whether to issue an order under 911G1, FDA must assess not only whether the proposed modified risk claim is scientifically accurate and consumers understand it, but also whether the product as it is actually used will reduce the risk to people who use tobacco products and benefit the population as a whole, taking into account both people who use tobacco and people who do not use tobacco. FDA's evaluation of an MRTPA can be thought of in terms of a few key overarching questions. Each of these involves the evaluation of many specific questions which draws from multiple scientific disciplines. In evaluating an MRTPA, FDA has to consider the product with the proposed modified risk information. The questions include, is the proposed modified risk claim scientifically accurate? What are the health risks of the MRTP to people who use tobacco? How do consumers perceive and understand the modified risk claim? And what are the potential benefits and harms to the health of the population as a whole? In Swedish Match's previous MRTPA, FDA conducted thorough scientific review of all the available scientific evidence, including, but not limited to, long-term epidemiological studies assessing long-term health impacts, as well as behavioral changes and perceptions and intentions data. On October 22nd, 2019, FDA issued Swedish Match a modified risk granted order under Section 911G1 of the FD&C Act for 8 general snus smokeless tobacco products listed on this slide. Throughout this presentation, we refer to these 8 products as the general snus products. The applicant's currently authorized modified risk claim is, using general snus instead of cigarettes puts you at a lower risk of mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. Now that I've provided an overview of the risk modification orders, how we evaluated the original MRTPA, and the history of Swedish Match's risk modification order, let's discuss the current renewal application. The risk modification order is for 5 years and expires on October 22nd, 2024. On July 17th, 2023, FDA received a renewal MRTPA from Swedish Match, which states that the applicant is seeking to continue to market their general snus products with the same modified risk claim. FDA is reviewing the scientific information submitted in the renewal MRTPA to determine whether the statutory requirements for authorization provided in Section 911 continue to hold. In addition to the evidence presented by the applicant, we will consider recommendations made today by the committee, public comments, and any other scientific evidence or information that is available to the agency. Under Section 911I1 of the FD&C Act, FDA must require post-market surveillance and studies, or PMSS, for any product for which an applicant received an order under 911G1. This is in order to determine the impact of the order issuance on consumer perception, behavior, and health, to enable the Secretary to review the accuracy of the determinations upon which the order was based, and to provide information that the Secretary determines is otherwise necessary regarding the use or health risks involving the tobacco product. The specific PMSS requirements for Swedish Match include the following: monitoring the use of the 8 general snus products that were authorized to be marketed with the modified risk claim in terms of uptake, dual use, and complete switching, particularly assessing the extent to which people who newly started using the MRTP were not using any other tobacco products, smoking combusted cigarettes, or using other tobacco products before initiating the MRTPs, and the extent to which people who newly started using the MRTPs exclusively use the MRTP or use the MRTP with combusted cigarettes or other tobacco products over time. An assessment of consumers' perceptions of the products and understanding of the claim, particularly that to reduce their risk of disease relative to smoking, they must use general snus exclusively. and surveillance of general snus sales and distribution, adverse experiences, and new research findings. The applicant was required to submit PMSS protocols for approval. The applicant did so, and FDA reviewed and approved the PMSS protocols before the studies began. The applicant submitted reports outlining their progress on PMSS activities each year as a part of their annual report. Now that you know the applicant's PMSS requirements, I'm going to describe the marketing and sales landscape after they received the risk modification order. The applicant's advertising and marketing is limited in scope, budget, and impressions. Impressions are the number of times the intended audience had an opportunity to view the advertisements. This limited advertising and marketing consisted of a branded website, trade print advertisements, Facebook-only social media posts, paid digital advertising, earned media, and point-of-sale advertisements using the modified risk claim. Earned media refers to unpaid media publicity that the applicant did not commission or pay for. For example, a news article about the product. On the slide is an example of a print advertisement displaying the modified risk claim. Overall, sales of general snus are declining. As part of their PMSS requirements, the applicant submitted sales and distribution data showing declining sales since the risk modification order. The applicant's data show that during 2019 through 2023, both wholesale unit and dollar sales decreased. Wholesale units by cans decreased from 4.94 million cans to 3.47 million cans. And wholesale dollar sales decreased from 17.52 million to 14.96 million. FDA conducted an internal analysis of general snus sales data using Nielsen IQ Retail Measurement Service, or RMS, data between 2019 and 2023. Sales of general snus products with modified risk granted orders were evaluated on a quarterly basis, and we matched general snus products in the Nielsen IQ RMS data by the UPC codes provided in the renewal MRTPA. Overall, sales of general snus products in Nielsen IQ RMS data have fallen from 6.6 million to 4.9 million. Now that I've discussed the renewal application, let's shift to the lines of evidence we received and reviewed and TPSAC's focus for discussion. Today, we are asking the committee to focus on a few key areas. First, we will assess the evidence related to the use of the MRTP and impact to the population. We will begin by describing data from observational studies and the applicant's general snus patterns of use study to describe characteristics of people who use snus, patterns of tobacco use among people who use general snus, and transitions from combusted cigarette smoking to exclusive use of general snus. TPSAC will be asked to discuss the use behaviors with respect to the modified risk tobacco products. Second, we will present the applicant's study results relevant to consumer understanding and perceptions. TPSAC will be asked to discuss the evidence related to consumer understanding and perceptions of the modified risk claim. There are two questions that we are posing to TPSAC. Question number one. FDA reviewed the literature, the applicant's data, and conducted internal analyses of the applicant's data to describe the characteristics of people who use snus, patterns of tobacco use among people who use general snus, and transitions from combusted cigarette smoking to exclusive use of general snus. What does TPSAC think about the use behaviors with respect to the modified risk tobacco products? And question number 2. FDA reviewed the applicant's data on consumer understanding and perception of the modified risk information. What does TPSAC think about the evidence related to consumer understanding and perceptions of the modified risk claim? Well, that concludes my introductory presentation. Now I think I will hand it back over to the chair. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. We're going to continue to move through the agenda, and I'd like to now ask the team from Swedish Match to come up and give their presentation.
Thank you, Serena. Appreciate that. Yes, hi, my name is Jerry Rorty. I'm the Vice President and General Counsel of Legal Affairs for Swedish Match USA. Thanks for joining us today. I really, really appreciate you all being here. I also like to thank my wife for picking out this fabulous tie to match my suit. So thanks, Julie. I'm very proud to be standing here representing not only Swedish Match, but also our general snus consumers, tens of thousands of them who in the U.S., many of whom have transitioned away from cigarettes to our products. We're proud of our commitment to a cigarette-free America, but everyone in this room should be proud to participate in a forum that shows transparent, data-driven discussions can improve American public health. As Director Brian King said when unveiling the Center's new 5-year strategic plan, this is a critical moment in the history of tobacco product regulation. The Center's mission is to make tobacco-related disease and death a part of America's past. Today, together, we can meaningfully advance that goal. Swedish Match was not only the first company to receive an MRTP, but also the first to go through this MRTP renewal process. We're also proud to be a pioneer in modified risk products. When FDA reviews an MRTP, they must assess the product against the criteria established by Section 911 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Namely, an applicant must demonstrate that the product and claim will significantly reduce harm and the risk of tobacco-related disease to individual tobacco users, and also benefit the health of the population as a whole, taking into account both users of the tobacco products and persons who do not use tobacco products. And this is the conclusion that FDA reached when they granted our modified risk order. 5 years ago, FDA authorized us to inform smokers that a reduced risk product can make a real difference to their health if they will switch completely from cigarettes. As specified in our order letter, our authorizations were limited to a term of 5 years, so we are back before TPSAC to present our case for renewal of the existing order. The agency's decision was based on these 4 key conclusions. General snus has the potential to significantly reduce harm and the risk of tobacco-related disease. Consumers understand the relative risk of general snus compared to cigarettes and their need to switch completely. General snus, when marketed with the modified risk claim, promotes complete switching and reduction in cigarettes. And General snus does not appeal to youth. Since the claim authorization, we collected additional post-market evidence which demonstrates that General Snus products continue to fulfill these criteria. Today, we will summarize that evidence, update you on recent research, and demonstrate how our responsible marketing practices maintain low levels of use by unintended populations. Swedish Snus as a category has been available in Sweden for over 100 years, and the General Snus brand has been around for quite a long time. Swedish Snus is a smokeless tobacco product, traditionally produced in Sweden. It is non-fermented and air-cured. The modified risk products include 8 General Snus varieties that have been made available in the U.S. for more than a decade. As you may know, these 8 products received the first ever PMTA authorizations in 2015. As a result of the MRTP authorization, we are able to use General Snus's website to communicate to consumers the following. Using General Snus instead of cigarettes puts you at a lower risk of mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. Having these products marketed with this claim is essential in helping move adult consumers down the continuum of risk. The claim works. It must be allowed to keep working. Now, 5 years later, the products have entered the stage of the process and are up for renewal of the MRTP. So, what is required for the renewal of an MRTP? And how does this differ from our initial MRTP application? Because no final guidance governs the renewal approach, we relied upon the FDA's draft MRTP guidance to shape our approach. Related to renewals, the key points of this guidance are, 1, the data provided by the applicant should continue to show that the product is APPH. And 2, the applicant should comply with required post-market surveillance and studies. This emphasizes the importance of post-market evidence, which will demonstrate that the product continues to satisfy the requirements. General Snus has been extensively studied through both the PMTA and MRTP pathways. It's important to emphasize that through these complementary pathways, the agency assessed the benefit to the population on the whole and monitored post-market surveillance throughout the authorization period. The key differences for the MRTP pathway include an assessment of whether the product significantly reduced the harms and risks associated with tobacco-related disease. The MRTP pathway also includes an assessment of a modified risk claim, including whether the claim is both supported by scientific evidence and understood by consumers. Finally, MRTPs are subject to renewal. Now let's talk a bit about process. The MRTP process is a rigorous, often multi-year endeavor that includes multiple phases of review to achieve authorization. The process begins with pre-submission meetings between the agency and the sponsor to discuss key aspects of the application. Once submitted, the application moves through acceptance and filing reviews, and finally, through a substantive scientific review process, which for our initial application involved FDA going over more than 100,000 pages of scientific data. There's also an opportunity for public participation in the review process through the combination of public of a public comment period and a TPSAC meeting. And then FDA takes action by issuing a decision on the application. In the event of an authorization, products enter the post-market surveillance period, where information is routinely provided to the FDA based on the requirements established in their authorization. Finally, after the end of the authorization period, an MRTP renewal must be submitted, and the process begins again. The key takeaway here is that the MRTP process is science-based and rigorous. And Swedish Match has already completed the 4 phases of this process as part of their initial MRTP, including ongoing post-market reporting on an annual basis. We are now in phase 3 for this renewal. Given that this meeting is focused on an MRTP renewal, we will only briefly discuss the history of the products and the large body of scientific evidence that has been collected and reviewed at multiple points over the last 10 years. The General Snus products were first authorized as appropriate for the protection of public health through the pre-market tobacco product application process in 2015, following a PMTA submission earlier in that same year. Since then, Swedish Match has submitted 8 annual reports over as many years, the last 4 of which were combined with MRTP annual reporting. The General Snus products were submitted for consideration through the MRTP process in June of 2014. A TPSAC meeting was held, and the FDA issued a partial decision in December 2016, where they determined that additional information would be needed in order to grant the modified risk tobacco product authorization. Swedish Match amended and submitted a second MRTP in September of 2018, which was followed by a TPSAC meeting and a later authorization in October of 2019. The MRTP renewal for the products was submitted in July of 2023, triggering the 3rd TPSAC meeting on these products, which is being held today. In total, across the PMTA and MRTP processes, Swedish Match has submitted 4 applications, presented at 3 TPSAC meetings, including today, and submitted 8 years of required annual reporting to the FDA regarding the General Snus products. Throughout the 8-year surveillance period, Swedish Match has not received any communication or concerns from the FDA regarding the APPH status of these products. To summarize, the evidence surrounding General Snus is extensive and led the FDA to authorize both a PMTA and MRTP for these products. Based on the PMTA, FDA concluded that the marketing of General Snus is APPH for both users and non-users. Based on the MRTP, FDA found that General Snus, as actually used by consumers, will significantly reduce harm and the risk of tobacco-related disease to individual tobacco users, and benefit the health of the population as a whole, taking into account both users and non-users of tobacco products. The results of our post-market surveillance and studies have not raised new questions of public health and therefore support and reinforce FDA's prior actions. For the remainder of this presentation, we will discuss the real-world evidence and post-market surveillance and studies that continue to demonstrate that General Snus is APPH and that the MRTP authorization should be renewed. When we received authorization for the 8 General Snus products, FDA's assessment was comprised of 4 main evaluations. The first of those is health to individual users. The second is consumer understanding and perceptions. The third is tobacco use behavior and the impact to the population. The fourth and final is responsible marketing and controls. Similarly, all of these were components of our required post-market surveillance and studies, which we will discuss today. This leads us to the agenda for the remainder of the presentation, and I'll first turn it over to Dr. Trygve Ljung, the VP of Scientific Affairs at Swedish Match, who will discuss the scientific assessment of General Snus products. Jen Mulligan, the Director of Marketing Services at Swedish Match, will then discuss how we are responsibly marketing the General Snus products with our authorization claim. So at this point, I'd like to pass the podium to Dr. Ljung.
Thank you, Jerry, for the introduction. Again, my name is Dr. Trygve Ljung, and I am the Vice President of Scientific Affairs at Swedish Match. Today, I would like to walk through the conclusions made in the original MRTP and the post-market evidence collected since then, which collectively show that the authorized General Snus products remain appropriate for the protection of public health. As Jerry mentioned, we will cover the post-market scientific evidence in 3 parts. First, the health risks to individual users. Second, consumers' understanding and perceptions. And finally, tobacco use behavior and impact to the population. We will begin with a discussion of the health risks associated with General Snus use relative to other tobacco products. In their 2019 review, FDA concluded that the scientific evidence supported the conclusion that exclusive users of General Snus have lower risk relative to cigarette smokers for mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. This conclusion was based on long-term epidemiological data coupled with the fact that harmful and potentially harmful constituents, or HPHCs, in General Snus are significantly lower than other smokeless tobacco products that were on the U.S. market during the same period. In FDA's prior evaluation of HPHCs, they stated that, and I'm now going to read from the slide, the levels of NNN and NNK in these General Snus products are lower than those in the vast majority of smokeless tobacco products on the U.S. market, and when used exclusively instead of other smokeless tobacco products, the General Snus products offer the potential for reduction in oral cancer risk. This shows that General Snus use poses lower risk than use of cigarettes and even other smokeless products based on their HPHC profile. Swedish Match has been focused on reducing the presence of HPHCs in our products for decades and implemented the use of the GOTIA-TEC standard to further this goal. The GOTIA-TEC standard is a manufacturing standard that has requirements for ingredients, processing, and levels of harmful and potentially harmful constituents. This chart depicts the evolution of HPHCs in General Snus measured as part of the GOTIA-TEC standard over almost 4 decades. What you can see is that over time, Swedish Match was able to dramatically reduce the levels of HPHCs to a place where they are now incredibly low. If we are looking at the red line, we're looking at total levels of tobacco-specific nitrosamines, which are known carcinogens. Those TSNAs are made up of primarily NNN, the light green line, and NNK, the dark green line. In addition, the black line is showing levels of benzoyl-pyrene, another potent carcinogen, which has also been reduced to very low levels in general snus. The low levels of these HPHCs were recognized by the FDA during their original evaluation, and as you can see, the levels have remained low over the course of the authorization period. When comparing to other smokeless tobacco products, we can see that the levels of TSNAs in general snus, particularly NNN, are exceptionally low. This figure shows the levels of NNN measured in a series of smokeless tobacco products. The first and second bars show levels of NNN in loose and pochette moist snuff. When comparing to these smokeless products, the levels of NNN in general snus, shown by this third bar, is reduced by more than 80%. Further demonstrating the importance of considering HPHCs in assessment of health risks, the FDA proposed a tobacco product standard in 2017 that would limit levels of NNN in smokeless products to less than 1 microgram per gram, shown by the red dotted line. This proposed product standard is expected to reduce tobacco-related harms by requiring lower levels of NNN in smokeless tobacco products and thereby reducing the risk of oral and possibly other types of cancer in smokeless tobacco product users. General snus is one of very few smokeless tobacco products that already complies with this proposed product standard, and therefore the collective post-market evidence indicates that general snus continues to maintain exceptionally low levels of tobacco-specific nitrosamines and benzoyl-pyrene levels over time. This is likely to translate to improved health outcomes among smokers who transition exclusively to general snus. While HPHCs are useful tools in assessing potential exposure risk associated with tobacco use, long-term epidemiological evidence is the most reliable indicator for evaluating individual and population health risks. This is a rather busy slide, which I will walk you through. Over the course of the post-market period, new epidemiological evidence was published regarding 3 of the disease outcomes specified in the claim: mouth cancer, heart disease, and stroke. No new evidence was identified regarding lung cancer, emphysema, or chronic bronchitis. In this chart, we examine the hazard ratio for the disease outcomes specified in the claim, which are shown on the left of the slide. The pre-market evidence for snus, on which the original authorization was based, is shown in black. Data in blue indicate new post-market evidence for snus, which should be compared to data in red, which represents smoking. As you can see, the new post-market evidence continues to support that snus users are at reduced risk of mouth cancer, heart disease, and stroke compared to smokers. And therefore, the collective evidence demonstrates that the claim remains scientifically accurate. As our final topic relating to health risks, we also want to discuss the outcome of our annual reporting of adverse experiences associated with general snus use. Throughout the post-market surveillance period, which spans our annual reporting submitted through October 2023, no serious or unexpected adverse experiences were reported. Our ongoing monitoring does not signal any concerns regarding adverse experiences related to general snus product use. In the previous section, we discussed how HPHCs coupled with the GOTIA-TEX standard make general snus a lower risk tobacco product, and that the HPHCs remain consistent since authorization. For the rest of this portion of our presentation, we will focus on the evidence collected after the MRTP authorization during the post-market surveillance period. Now, we will focus on the post-market evidence regarding the modified risk claim and whether tobacco product users understand the information in the claim. During their initial evaluation of our MRTP application, the FDA looked at our likelihood of use study. The FDA determined that consumers generally understood the proposed modified risk claim and also understood that the relative risk of general snus is lower compared to smoking. As part of the requirement for the post-market surveillance and studies, we conducted a longitudinal cohort pattern of use study, or POU study. Over the course of 24 months, we looked at general snus users, how they use the product, their use of other tobacco products, and their perceptions of absolute and relative risk. This was to make sure that the information in the claim continued to be understood following its authorization. Here we are looking at the design of the general snus POU study, which consisted of a self-reported longitudinal survey examining the understanding of the modified risk claim and patterns of past 30-day use of tobacco nicotine products, or TNPs, among general snus users at baseline and again among the same general snus users at 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. To recruit respondents, cans of general snus were sold at retail with a sticker directing the purchaser to a website where they could opt into the study. Participants were screened for predefined inclusion criteria, including past 30-day use of any general snus product and a minimum age of 21 years. We provided FDA with a study plan, which they approved in April 2020. As part of this study, we asked consumers, does using general snus instead of cigarettes place you at a lower risk, the same risk, a higher risk, or no risk? As you can see, the result of this question demonstrates that consumers continue to comprehend that general snus use poses a lower risk than cigarette use. Across all 4 waves of the study spanning 24 months, you can see that the vast majority of respondents correctly reported that disease risk associated with general snus is lower than that of cigarettes. Furthermore, this data demonstrates that the consumers' perceptions were consistent with those measured before authorization, and those perceptions did not change during the 24-month study period. The POU study confirmed FDA's prior conclusion that consumers understand that completely switching to general snus would reduce the risk of disease compared to smoking, and the perceived health risks associated with using general snus are lower than those associated with smoking. The study also examined perceptions of dual use and consumers' understanding of the need to switch completely to general snus. In 2019, when the agency authorized the use of the modified risk claim, they noted the claim did not lead smokers to believe that partial substitution of general snus for cigarettes would reduce their disease risk. The agency also confirmed that the claim enabled consumers to understand that dual use of general snus with cigarettes is more harmful than exclusively using general snus. Again, as part of our PUU study, we asked general snus consumers how many cigarettes can be smoked in addition to using general snus to maintain a lower risk of disease. The respondents could choose from one of the following answers: 0 cigarettes, up to 5 cigarettes, up to 20 cigarettes, or as many cigarettes as you want. Across all 4 ways, you can see that the vast majority, over 80% of the respondents, correctly noted that general snus users must not smoke any cigarettes to maintain a lower risk. Once more, the post-market evidence confirmed FDA's prior conclusion that the consumers understand the need to completely switch from cigarettes to general snus. To round out our scientific assessment, we will now discuss how consumers are using general snus and other tobacco products in the real world. As part of our 2-year PUU study, we looked at exactly this. A critical component of assessing tobacco product use behavior is assessing transition from one tobacco product to another. As part of their prior analysis, the agency found that the marketing of general snus was expected to result in a population health benefit by switching smokers to snus. The agency also suggested that general snus use could facilitate switching from other smokeless tobacco products, which would also reduce both HPHC exposure and oral cancer risk in this population. Here we are showing you information from the PUU study about participants' prior fairly regular use of various TNPs. The majority of established general snus users reported fairly regular prior use of cigarettes or traditional smokeless products, comprising 84% of users studied. 4% reporting exclusive use of snus products, and 11% reported prior use of another TNP. Only 1% of all study participants reported no prior use of TNPs. This data suggests that the majority of established general snus users have a history of cigarette and or smokeless tobacco use, and therefore could benefit from transitioning to general snus based on the available epidemiological data. Now, given that the authorized claim speaks directly to switching to general snus from cigarettes, we also assessed switching behavior among smokers. To be clear, our PUU study was not designed to assess switching, but we can provide some evidence on this topic. If we look at subjects who were everyday smokers at the start of the study, we can see a reduction in everyday smoking down to about 50% at wave 4. Also, about 17% of study participants who were daily smokers at baseline are no longer smoking at wave 4. So for half of the sample, dual use appears to be a transitional state which enables consumers to switch or reduce their use of cigarettes with time. In addition to the changes in daily versus some days smoking, we also see a reduction in cigarettes per day among general snus users. In waves 3 and 4, people who were everyday smokers at baseline reported smoking on average 6 cigarettes per day, or CPD. This represents about a 50% decrease from the average baseline CPD. This data confirms that under real-world conditions, many smokers who used general snus were able to successfully switch or reduce their CPD over the course of 24 months. As you remember, when we discussed how the FDA evaluates MRTPs under Section 911, they assess potential benefits to the individual user of that product and evaluate the impact on the population who do not use the product, non-users and former users, and in particular, non-users who are youth. In their review of the original MRTP application, the FDA found that although youth are in general at risk of tobacco use initiation, surveillance data on U.S. tobacco use suggests snus is not of particular interest among youth. Based on data from the National Youth Tobacco Survey studied by FDA and CDC, this remains true today. When we look at past 30-day use of a variety of traditional tobacco products, we can see that snus has a very low prevalence of use among youth, as shown in the blue line on the bottom. If we focus on the period since the MRTP was authorized, shown in the yellow box, we see that rates of youth use of snus are low across the authorization period. As of 2023, the percentage of youth using snus is about 1%, which is lower than the 2019 estimates and similar to estimates from the past several years. So, even while the current tobacco marketplace features numerous brands, strengths, and flavors of snus, post-market data confirms FDA's prior conclusions. The data continues to demonstrate an absence in appeal and uptake of snus among youth. To conclude our scientific assessment, we will recap the findings from our post-market surveillance and studies. No serious adverse experiences were reported in the U.S. or internationally. Respondents in the PUU study continue to understand that the relative risk of general snus use is lower than cigarettes and the need to switch completely. Over the 24-month PUU study, about 17% of everyday smokers using general snus completely stopped smoking. 1/3 of everyday smokers using general snus became someday smokers, and everyday smokers using general snus showed a 50% reduction in CPD. This demonstrates the potential for smokers to use general snus to switch from or reduce their cigarette consumption. And finally, the prevalence of use of snus in youth is approximately 1%. This totality of evidence confirms and reinforces the FDA's prior conclusions that led to the MRTP authorization. And therefore, TPSAC should recommend that FDA grant the MRTP renewal. Now, I will turn it over to Jan to discuss the marketing assessment for the general snus products.
Thank you, Trygve. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jen Mulligan, and I'm the Director of Marketing Services at Swedish Match. I will be walking you through Swedish Match's responsible marketing practices and controls as they pertain to General Snus. At the core of our responsible marketing is our intended audience. Our intended audience is adults that are over the age of 21 who are current tobacco and nicotine consumers. All of our marketing practices and controls and FDA's efforts related to marketing surveillance are designed to ensure that our products reach adult tobacco and nicotine consumers and do not reach unintended audiences. With this in mind, the agency outlined the following marketing information to be routinely submitted for their review through annual reporting. Swedish Match complied with these requirements throughout the product authorization period, giving the FDA a thorough understanding of our marketing practices, controls, and materials. In addition to annual reporting, Swedish Match also complies with all FDA-mandated marketing rules and regulations, as well as those required by law. But as a company, we take additional voluntary measures to ensure responsible marketing practices are applied to our entire portfolio of tobacco and nicotine products, including General Snus. We have a history of taking conservative approaches to marketing, instituting age-gated marketing practices before they were required, because it was the right thing to do as a company and the right thing to do for our consumers. Let's take a closer look at some of those responsible marketing practices and controls. First, we will discuss proactive transparency. We value and promote transparency with consumers, policymakers, and regulators to ensure our marketing practices and restrictions meet our stakeholders' needs. We provide consumers with truthful information within the confines of the regulation. Next, careful retail placement. We require our retailers to place General Snus behind the counter to ensure that consumers have been age verified by the retailer before having access to the product. Moving to restraint with advertising, General Snus voluntarily avoids outdoor advertising like billboards and does not advertise through TV or other mass media vehicles to ensure that our marketing is viewed only by our intended audience. We select models for advertisements who are visibly over the age of 35. This image is an example of a social media post on the General Snus Facebook page, which is age restricted. We restrict our social media marketing to only those platforms that have age restriction capabilities. And finally, Swedish Match does not partner with or sponsor professional athletes or social influencers. These are examples of our responsible marketing practices and the activities that we avoid. Now, we'll go through some examples of consumer-facing materials. Here, we show a few examples of our marketing materials for General Snus, including point-of-sale materials, as well as an email and a direct mailer that is sent to age-verified consumers within our database. All of these materials were provided to the FDA as part of our last annual report. What you will notice is that none of these sample marketing materials contain the claim, and that's because the claim is currently limited to use on our age-gated website. The General Snus website is age-gated by third-party age verification partners, limiting access to anyone under the age of 21. Consumers must successfully verify their age, confirm they are a current tobacco and nicotine user, and create an account to access the website. This ensures that all website visitors meet criteria for our intended audience. To be clear, the claim, which was authorized as part of our 2019 MRTP, is currently only communicated on the General Snus website behind the previously discussed age gate. Now I would like to show you the steps that a consumer would take to gain access to the General Snus modified risk claim on our website. First, the consumer would need to visit our website at generalsnus.com and click on the box to register now. This will prompt a pop-up requiring the consumer to answer the question, are you a current tobacco or nicotine user? If the consumer answers no, their access to the website registration process is denied. The website then states that General snus products are only for current tobacco and nicotine users aged 21 plus. Since you're not a current tobacco or nicotine user, there's no need to register on our website because General isn't for you. Again, this is a completely voluntary practice that Swedish Match implemented to ensure that we are not reaching unintended audiences. This is far above the standard practices for tobacco and nicotine products. If a consumer selects yes, that they are a current tobacco or nicotine user, they are admitted to begin the registration process. The first step in the process is age verification. The consumer is asked to enter their birthday and other personal information, which is then sent to our third-party age verification partner to be matched to existing government databases for confirmation. If a consumer's information cannot be verified, the registration process is stopped. If the consumer is successfully age verified, they move on to the next step in the registration process. In the second step, we capture consumer communication preferences and other consumer profile information. Then they move on to the final step in the registration process. Here, the consumer creates an account, username, and password to access the website. Once the consumer has been age verified and created a registered account on generalsnus.com, they are admitted to the website. Here, they can access the modified risk claim by either scrolling down on the home page or clicking on the navigation menu and selecting Modified Risk, designated by the yellow box on this slide. After clicking on Modified Risk, the consumer is redirected to a page about Modified Risk, and the claim appears roughly midway down that page. To summarize, the consumer must go through a very rigorous process to access the authorized modified risk claim. They must visit generalsnus.com, select Register Now, identify as a current tobacco or nicotine user, provide personal information for age verification, be successfully age verified, provide their communication preferences, create a username and password, and click on Modified Risk. While this process drastically limits the likelihood that the claim will be viewed by unintended audiences, it also limits the utility of the claim, making it difficult to reach the intended consumer, who could achieve a reduction in health risks by switching completely to the product. While we use multiple marketing channels for product advertising, our brand website is the only platform we currently use to communicate the claim. Smokers are up against a wall of misinformation about smoke-free products, and it's easy to be confused. It's hard to find science-backed information, and this committee can help change that. The renewal presents a great opportunity to discuss the potential to expand the use of the claim beyond our brand website. As shown in yellow, we would like to expand the use of the claim to align with the agency's thinking to include email and direct mail to 21-plus age-verified consumers within our database, point-of-sale materials, print advertising and publications where 85% or more of the audience is 21-plus, and other age-verified platforms such as social media and other digital platforms. By expanding use of the claim, we could not only align with the agency's current thinking, but also have a greater impact on public health. Other currently authorized MRTPs, like Copenhagen, which is also a smokeless product, are permitted to use their MRTP claim within these boundaries. With this in mind, we're prepared for discussion with the agency on ways to adjust the use of the claim to reach more smokers and smokeless tobacco product users who could benefit from our products. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jerry.
Sorry, I'm not getting any younger. It takes me a while to get up here. Jen, thanks so much. So the evidence presented here today does support MRTP renewal for general snus. We've consistently met all post-market requirements for both our PMTA and MRTP over the course of the last 8 years. Further, the post-market evidence surrounding general snus has not raised any new questions of public health. And finally, the reduced risk information, including in the claim, remains accurate and is helping to achieve our and the agency's desired outcomes for individual tobacco users and the population on the whole. The preponderance of the real-world scientific evidence and data continues to demonstrate the harm reduction potential of general snus, with the reduced risk claim and the general snus modified risk granted orders should be renewed. This process has been really hard. Being the first is just never easy, but the process should be hard because we're talking about very important issues of public health. But we're really proud to be part of it. The CTP offices have been great to work with. They've challenged us, as they should, but we want to thank them especially for helping us get through this process and achieve the great achievement of having the first MRTP and PMTA. So in closing, I want to thank the TPSAC committee. Each of you, thank you. The FDA, members of the public, the team, thank you, really. It was a collaborative effort to achieve the first ever MRTP authorization, and we look forward to having a continued discussion with you all. So at this point, we're happy to, questions? Is that the plan?
Yes, so we have, I'd like to keep us on track, but thank you for staying within your time. So I think we have about 10 minutes to open it up for clarifying questions, and I would like to start with one. Regarding the post-market surveillance study, I have two questions there. Did you measure continued use of general snus at all of the waves? And how you defined, you referred to them as established general snus users, but if I understand correctly, at the first wave, they had used general snus at least once in the past 30 days. And so is that your definition of established use, and did you measure continued use throughout the waves?
Yeah, thank you for that. When we sat down with CTP to come up with a study design, the decision was made to start with existing general snus consumers. So we did know that they were at least purchasing general snus products. With respect to the various measures within the POU, perhaps I could invite Dr. Jung to join us at the podium to address your questions.
Sure, thank you. And what we did was that we recruited respondents by stickers, and as a consequence, we could say that 52% of the study participants had been using general snus for at least 36 months. So they were, in general, well established. We tried to find a stratified cohort with new users, but we recruited very few of them. We did continue to measure general snus use throughout the waves. Thank you.
While you're still up there, a follow-up question. So you presented data showing that there were changes in cigarette smoking behavior over time, but did you also look at use of other tobacco products, potentially explaining that, and whether or not that the patterns you're seeing are different for the individuals in the general snus post-market surveillance study versus just secular changes in tobacco use behavior among adults in general over that time period?
So we did ask for all 10 different TNPs during that post-market surveillance study. And what you can see in general is mainly a stable usage pattern. The only things we actually saw some differences was a slight uptake of nicotine pouches over time, and actually NRT.
Adam, and then Lucy, and then Nancy, I think. And then Olivia after that, if we...
It's awkward. So, the MRTP is in relation to using your product instead of cigarettes, right? So my question is about your intended audience and consumer base, and I noticed in some of your research that you presented that a fairly modest proportion of the general snus users in your research smoke, and many of them use other tobacco products, including nicotine pouches and other smokeless. So my question for you is, to what extent, if the majority of the people who are using your product and purchasing it are not people who smoke combustible cigarettes, but are using other non-combusted products, to what extent does that influence the designation for the APPH? Right. And then one follow-up question. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I think appreciate that. So if I could, perhaps I could pull up slide 2 from and this if I could draw your attention to this, and again, this was 2015 PMTA, but again, remember there's a whole collection of evidence that went into what we were attempting to do here, and as you see in the CTP concluded that we're seeing a switching away from the most deadly product, cigarettes, to a product like snus. And what we have seen over time is that the reason we went the direction we did with the claim is because cigarette smoking is quite candidly the most deadly form of tobacco. Now, the fact that we had an added benefit of moving some smokeless tobacco consumers, moist snuff and things like that, that have higher levels of HPHCs down the risk continuum, of course, is a bonus. But again, the POU study, not meant to be a switching study, meant to be a check on whether the conclusions that the CTP found, that is, as a population level benefit, General Snus fits. And there was nothing in the research or the studies that would have undermined what CTP said before. So, not a perfect study by any means. We worked with the CTP to get there, but we find that the population harm gain is still there.
Okay, and one follow-up question related. So I noticed that your colleague talked about extending the marketing channels to point of sale, and one of the slides showed the General Snus product being sold right next to some of the nicotine pouch products. And so one question for you is, I think that there's some evidence, a study by Lieber, showing that pre and post MRTP authorization of your product, all different types of snus brands showed a slowing. There was a reduction, but it was slowing relative to other smokeless products, raising questions as to whether MRTP claims may have halo effects, whereby the consumer misperceives that the MRTP applies to not only different products within the general category, but other products. So getting back to my point, if there's an extension of the MRTP claims in point of sale or other types of marketing channels where there are other products, where there's no evidence, to my knowledge, that General Snus is less harmful than these other products, how can you ensure that that type of misperception would not happen?
couple questions in there, but I think I've teased it out. Let me say, as for the shelf space, we don't have any control over that. Honestly, I think there's some competitors out in the audience that have a lot more to do with that by virtue of their retail agreements. So the product winds up where it does, not very often by our choice. With respect to the halo effect, and I'm going to invite Dr. Joyce up here in a minute to talk about the study that you referenced, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. I know we're trying to keep this quick, but we'll try to do that quickly. But what I will say is that the CTP concluded with the Copenhagen folks that the MRTP claim could be at point of sale and be consistent with the mission of the MRTP program. That's why we included it within our wish list. So perhaps that's a question you could pose to them this afternoon. And then very quickly on the study, Dr. Joyce, would you like to come up and briefly talk about that? I know we're a little short on time.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Joyce, and I'm the president and CEO of Consilium Sciences. Our firm provides consulting services on scientific and regulatory matters for companies in the tobacco harm reduction space. While I am being compensated for my time today, I just want to make it clear as a disclaimer that I have no financial interest in the outcome of this particular meeting. So I'll attempt to comment on this particular halo effect. Just very briefly, I don't know that we have strong data that from the snus category indicating that there is a halo effect that translates to a nicotine pouch and that sort of thing. And I just want to make it clear that a consumer is going to be exposed not only to the claim, but also to the health warnings that go with it. So if we can get slide 2, just to enumerate, the consumer is going to be faced with a variety of other contextual pieces of information to make judgments on the relative safety of the product, especially vis-a-vis cigarette smoking. So.
Lucy?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to ask questions facing this way. In your POU study, did you measure the exposure to actual claim, either as a recall or any other way, and did you do any analysis with that?
Sure. Yeah, so FDA pointed out in their briefing materials the consumer was not shown the claim as part of the POU study. It was an intentional choice, actually.
Well, I'm not asking about intentionally showing them. They were in real world. The claim was there. Did you measure if they seen it or not?
Don't believe that was we did not ask that question. Instead, what we tried to do is contextualize, have they received the information in such a way that they could answer the survey. So no, we did not measure whether they had actually seen it.
Nancy?
I had a question about your longitudinal analysis of the post-marketing survey. There's a large dropout, a very large dropout, and so I wondered whether, and since we know that people who tend to stay in studies are those who have good things happening, I was wondering if you had adjusted for potential confounders or otherwise adjusted for to try to make sure that your conclusions would be without bias.
Sure. We're aware of the attritional analysis that the CTP has in their materials. And I guess what I would say is that we were the first, and so we tried to put together the most cohesive plan we could, and the results were what they were, and so we just shared with you who was left and what they said. But I think what I would offer is that even with attrition, we think there's some information in there that says, hey, this can work and this does work, and if we can meet more smokers where they are with this information, we hope we could achieve even greater results.
Olivia?
Hi, I want to follow up on Dr. Pova's question. So you said you didn't measure exposure to the claim itself, but did you measure perhaps the extent to which they were exposed to marketing materials where the claim may have been, whether they used the website or received mailings. So that was one question I had.
There you go. He shook his head. There's the answer. No, we didn't. We didn't do that.
Okay. And my second question is, can you just clarify why the claim is only on the website? I'm not clear if this is sort of a self-imposed thing or what was authorized or not authorized. I think in the beginning we did see the claim in emails and direct mailings, but somehow it shifted over time. And can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I guess the answer to your question is yes. So we have our authorization letter is very general. It talks in terms of you can use media that you can really measure and get lots of data on. We don't want any unintended audience to see this information. And so when we put the application together, we put the marketing plan, and we had all those. We had POS, we had other things like that. Over time, as we were having discussions with people outside the Office of Science, they began to say, can you really show us that this particular way of marketing checks all these boxes in terms of avoiding unintended audiences from seeing these things, and what measures do you have? And we just could not figure out a way to get there. We just couldn't. And we were struggling like crazy and said, you know what, in the end, the only place we know for absolute sure that we can meet what the folks outside the Office of Science were asking of us was the website, which is disappointing, but we just didn't know what else to do. And then we saw the Copenhagen decision, and it was like, okay, so people have begun to, I'm not going to call it a safe harbor by any stretch, but it just appears that there's been a evolution in thinking, and perhaps the center has gotten that information and they feel better about those channels. So we're kind of hoping just to be put on an even playing field with other smokeless products. I hope that helps. As I said, a little self-imposed, a little by dialogue with others. Yeah.
We're going to go to Sven and then Donna, and then we're going to wrap the segment up.
Thank you. I have two questions, one for Dr. Leung and one for Jennifer Mulligan. For Dr. Leung, I have questions about adverse events. Data out of Sweden have shown that snus users often present with oral mucosal lesions. There are other papers linking snus potentially with diabetes type 2. These may not come down to adverse events that are more like acute, but is your company and at the same time FDA monitoring these type of adverse presentations? My second question is for Jennifer Mulligan. Last week, Swedish Match's ZYN web store was closed after a subpoena from the Washington, D.C. Attorney General, probably due to sales of flavored tobacco products in Washington, D.C. Does this closure extend to the general snus web store, or is the web store regionally gated to prevent sales in regions of the United States with flavor bans? Thank you.
Thanks for both your questions. I'm actually going to handle your second question. We are, as we said publicly, we are actively and currently investigating that information in all our practices. I will tell you without doubt that we are absolutely committed to compliance across the board. The surest way to ensure that compliance with all of our products was to close the e-commerce site where we could do the investigation. With respect to General Snus, we are similarly committed to that, and really at this point, that's all I can really say about the matter. It's a pending matter. So with respect to your first question, however, I would invite Dr. Leung up to describe this. I do know that CTP does do surveillance, by the way, on these products.
Yes. So as to snus lesions, as you referred to, if they were reported as an adverse event, we would, of course, share that information. it's a well-known feature of snus users, and it does not qualify as a serious adverse event or an unexpected adverse event. And for general health outcomes, yes, we are following the literature. We are capturing consumer complaints, of course. But for the renewal process, I mean, if you refer to diabetes, it's not part of the claims. So this renewal is strictly related to data presented in the claim.
Donna?
Thank you. And I also recognize the limitations of an unexpected adverse event, and that the data you presented also showed an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and myocardial infarctions and stroke, lower than with cigarettes, but still a risk that we're not really addressing in the education of the public. And my other question is whether you've looked at any impact on interaction with ENDS, electronic nicotine delivery systems. I know you've looked at combusted cigarettes and other types of smokeless tobacco. Have you looked at anything with electronic nicotine delivery devices? Thank you.
I mean, to the extent that there is data in the POU to show what products they use, if we have a slide on it, we can certainly show it, but I don't believe so. We don't have it.
All right, and with that, we're going to conclude the segment. We're going to take a 10-minute break and reconvene at a 9-minute break at 10:50. I'd like to invite Nicole Tashikori up from FDA for the next presentation. Oh, she was there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Tashikori, and I'm an epidemiologist in CTP's Office of Science. I'm going to present on the general snus patterns of use and the impacts to the population. So this table presents summary relative risks from published meta-analyses or pooled analyses of the association between Swedish snus use and mouth cancer, heart disease, stroke, and lung cancer compared with people who do not use tobacco. This body of literature was reviewed in the original MRTPA. So the risks of oral cancer, lung cancer, and emphysema and chronic bronchitis are clearly lower in people who exclusively use Swedish snus compared to people who smoke cigarettes. The data for heart disease and stroke are mixed. However, as shown in the table, cigarette smoking has been found to increase the risk of cardiovascular disease by a factor of about 1.5 to 3-fold. A systematic review by Rostron and colleagues provided additional clear evidence that the heart disease risks due to Swedish snus use are lower than the risks from cigarette smoking. Additionally, this review found that the risk of stroke due to Swedish snus use is lower than the risk from cigarette smoking. So, since the MRGO in 2019, the newly published literature is generally consistent with the body of literature reviewed during the original MRTPA and provides additional evidence that the risks of mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis due to Swedish snus use are lower than the risk from combusted smoking. The applicant submitted published literature regarding individual health risks as part of their PMSS requirements. In addition, FDA conducted a review of individual health risk studies published between 2019 and 2023 regarding mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. These are the health outcomes listed in the modified risk claim in the 2019 MRGO. So overall, we analyzed a total of 10 studies that were published since the MRGO. And among these studies, we excluded 2 that did not focus on outcomes relevant to the modified risk claim, and 1 systematic review that overlapped with the other studies selected. Regarding mouth cancer, there was 1 study identified that evaluated the association with current snus use as compared to never snus use and observed no statistically significant association. FDA did not identify any new studies published since the MRGO that evaluated the association between current snus use and either lung cancer, emphysema, or chronic bronchitis. Therefore, there is no new information published since the MRGO to consider for these claim-related health outcomes. FDA evaluated 4 studies published since the MRGO that estimated an association between current snus use and stroke or heart disease morbidity and mortality. As noted in the slide, findings are mixed, ranging from no association to having increased risks. Titova and colleagues found that people who currently use snus and have never used combusted cigarettes have a significant 53% increased risk of total stroke and a 65% increased risk of ischemic stroke compared to people who never used tobacco. These results are based on a single cohort and are consistent with prior findings that the level of risk is below the well-established stroke risk of combusted cigarette smoking. Similarly, one study found a significant 27% increased risk of cardiovascular disease mortality among people who exclusively use snus and have never used combusted cigarettes. And this risk is still lower than that for combusted cigarette smoking. Data from the contemporary cohort among men aged 55 to 74 indicate that people who smoke combusted cigarettes have elevated risks of stroke and cardiovascular mortality. Therefore, the risk of stroke and cardiovascular disease mortality in people who exclusively use snus are lower relative to people who smoke combusted cigarettes, as FDA's prior evaluation concluded. And the scientific evidence published since the original MRGO continues to support the modified risk claim as scientifically accurate. Additionally, neither the applicant nor FDA safety reporting portal revealed any adverse experiences involving the product subject to this review since the issuance of their MRGO. So to provide some context, this section examines observational studies in the applicant's general snus patterns of use study that describes patterns of use for general snus. FDA will also review published literature from national representative surveys of tobacco use among youth and adults. The applicant cites results from Waves 1 of the PATH study, where 0.4% of U.S. adults were current established users of pouched snus. Population estimates from FDA's internal analysis of PATH Wave 7 data indicate that 0.7% of adults reported using snus in the past 30 days. The applicant cited 2022 NYTS data that showed 1% of students reporting ever use of snus and 0.5% indicated use of snus at least once in the past 30 days. Results from an internal analysis of the 2023 NYTS data indicate that 0.8% of middle and high school students report current snus use. In the 2022 NYTS, snus use was assessed separately from other smokeless tobacco products. The applicant conducted an online survey examining use behavior of general snus and other tobacco and nicotine products at multiple time points. This prospective study spanned 2 years. Participants were asked to complete the survey at 4 time points: baseline, 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years. And in a subsequent slide, I'll display the time periods and sample sizes for each wave. Participants who completed the baseline survey were allowed to participate in any of the subsequent waves, regardless of participation in prior follow-up waves. The applicant recruited purchasers of general snus products through invitation stickers placed on product packaging. These products with invitation stickers were available at approximately 10,600 retail stores across all locations where general snus was sold from July 25th, 2020 until August 7th, 2020. The applicant also recruited via email people who opted in and registered to receive communications for general snus. Study participants received $40 for each completed survey and an additional $50 bonus if they completed all 3 follow-up surveys. So to be eligible for the study, individuals must have reported current use of a general snus product at baseline, defined as using at least once within the past 30 days prior to study initiation and using it every day or on some days prior to study initiation. They also had to be U.S. residents, aged 21 years or older, who reported being able to read and speak English. Lastly, they had to agree to participate in 4 surveys over a 24-month period and provide consent and personal contact information. The applicant excluded individuals who selected don't know or declined to answer to survey questions about their gender or geographic region, who participated in consumer research on tobacco and nicotine products in the 2 weeks prior to accessing the baseline survey, who were employed in market research, marketing, advertising, tobacco and nicotine product manufacturing, or as a physician. So as previously stated, the applicant provided their general snus patterns of use study, which assessed use behavior through the applicant's 3 primary objectives. First is to compare tobacco and nicotine patterns of use. Second is to compare consumption patterns of combusted cigarettes and general snus over the last 30 days with consumption patterns in waves 2 through 4. And third is to assess complete substitution and cessation behaviors among people who dual use combusted cigarettes and general snus. The applicant originally had another primary objective, comparing prior tobacco and nicotine product use and demographics to people who newly use smokeless tobacco and nicotine products, but this was eliminated midway through the study due to a low sample size of new users. The patterns of use study also indicates several secondary objectives pertaining to risk perception and understanding of the modified risk claim, which will be covered in a subsequent presentation. So the figure on this slide depicts the general snus patterns of use study sample size by study wave. The study experienced higher than expected dropout rates over the 2-year study duration. A priori, the applicant estimated a 40% dropout rate per year, resulting in an estimated sample size of 1,200 participants in Wave 2, 900 in Wave 3, 540 in Wave 4. However, the actual attrition rate was higher, as the figure indicates. Overall, only 281 participants completed all study waves, indicating a 17% full study retention rate. The applicant removed additional responses from each wave due to data cleaning. Differential loss to follow-up by tobacco use status could impact the study's ability to observe transitions in tobacco use and result in biased study results. As a result, FDA conducted an attrition analysis on the applicant's data to evaluate potential demographic or tobacco use differences in participants who dropped out versus those who were retained at each study wave. We will discuss these results in the limitations slide. Now that you have an overview of the study design, I will describe the demographics of who participated in the study. At baseline, respondents were predominantly male, non-Hispanic white, and lived in the South or Midwest. The mean age was 36 years old. Most had some college or associate's or bachelor's degrees and an annual household income of less than 500,000 or 500,000 to less than 100,000. Regarding tobacco use behaviors, all participants used general snus. Baseline participants predominantly used more than 200 general snus pouches in their lifetime. Approximately 18% of baseline participants reported currently smoking combusted cigarettes, 37% reported formerly smoking combusted cigarettes, and 45% reported never smoking combusted cigarettes. Among those who currently smoked combusted cigarettes, over 60% reported a readiness to quit by a quit attempt in the past 29 days, currently trying to quit, or with high intention to quit in the future. Participant characteristics were mostly similar from baseline to Wave 4. However, compared to the total baseline participants, those who completed Wave 4 were more likely to report an income greater than $100,000 per year and educational attainment of postgraduate degree. In terms of tobacco use characteristics, those who completed Wave 4 were more likely to have used over 200 lifetime number of general snus pouches. Among those who smoked combusted cigarettes, there were differences in readiness to quit between baseline and those who returned at Wave 4. FDA notes that participant demographics in the current study are more similar to people who report using smokeless tobacco than those who report using combusted cigarettes. This table depicts general snus and combusted cigarette use patterns at baseline and wave 4. At baseline, approximately 82% reported using general snus every day, and 18% reported using general snus on some days. 26% reported using general snus exclusively. These numbers didn't drastically change over time. So at wave 4, the majority, at around 60%, still use general snus every day, while 27% use general snus some days. 22% still use general snus exclusively. The applicant defined dual use as participants who reported using general snus and combusted cigarettes, regardless of other tobacco product use. This means that these dual use with tobacco products. This means that these dual use with combusted cigarette overall, everyday, and someday estimates include people who use other tobacco and nicotine products, like nicotine pouches or moist snuff. This isn't depicted on this slide, but it is reported in the backgrounder. Over half of the baseline sample reported using general snus with another non-combusted cigarette tobacco product. And among baseline participants, approximately 33% reported use of nicotine pouches, 33% reported use of moist snuff. Dual use with combusted cigarettes only indicates exclusive general snus and combusted cigarette dual use. At baseline, approximately 7% report using general snus with combusted cigarettes every day, and 11% report dual use on some days. At wave 4, 3.5% report everyday dual use and 8% report someday dual use. Now that we've discussed use patterns, let's discuss if participants substituted combusted cigarette use with general snus or quit both products over time. Evidence from published literature suggests that about 5% of people who dual use combusted cigarettes and smokeless tobacco report completely switching to a smokeless tobacco product over time. This slide depicts FDA's analysis of the applicant's data, and we found higher estimates of switching behavior. Complete substitution was defined as participants who use general snus and combusted cigarettes at baseline, but quit combusted cigarette smoking and only use general snus at waves 2, 3, or 4. Participants who completely substituted general snus for combusted cigarettes may use other tobacco products. Cessation was defined as participants who completely substituted general snus for combusted cigarettes, plus those who quit both products. As displayed in the table, among study participants who were dual users at baseline, 9% report quitting combusted cigarettes by wave 4, and 8.4% report completely substituting combusted cigarettes with general snus. The general snus patterns of use study had some limitations. Thus, FDA replicated some of the applicant's findings and conducted additional analysis when needed. Namely, FDA found evidence of differential attrition. This means that participants who were younger, had a lower household income, used general snus non-daily, and used less than 200 general snus pouches in their lifetime tended to drop out of the study. Also, regarding tobacco use behaviors, people who exhibited a higher readiness to quit stayed in the study. These findings suggest that the observed tobacco use transitions may not accurately represent the actual likelihood of transition when the data appears to not be missing at random. To account for this, FDA calculated complete substitution and cessation using people who report combusted cigarettes at baseline as the denominator, which assumes that people who smoked combusted cigarettes and dropped out of the study continued to smoke. Overall, no new health risks were identified in the published literature, and FDA's original MRTPA review conclusions regarding claim substantiation hold. NYTS and PATH data indicate low prevalence of snus use among U.S. youth and adults, with general snus representing only a fraction of these small estimates. The general snus patterns of use studies suggest that 8.5% or more people who dual use general snus and combusted cigarettes at baseline quit combusted cigarette use 2 years later. The true estimate is hard to know because the high degree of attrition, which appeared to be differential with respect to smoking behavior. While the study had some limitations, findings add to the body of evidence that some people who use General Snus use the product to help them quit combusted cigarettes. Now that I've covered the behavioral evidence on General Snus use and the impacts to the population, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Venrick, to discuss consumer perceptions and understanding.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Samantha Venrick. I'm a social scientist in CTP's Office of Science. I'm going to present results related to consumer perceptions and understanding from the General Snus Patterns of Use study. To start the discussion about consumer understanding and perceptions, let's review the FD&C Act's requirements for marketing MRTPs. The FD&C Act requires that the public can comprehend the information concerning modified risk in any advertising or labeling concerning an MRTP and understand the significance of that information in the context of total health. Now that we know the requirements, let's dive into the information submitted by the applicant. As we just heard from my colleague Nicole, the applicant conducted an online survey titled General Snus Patterns of Use Study. In addition to assessing use behaviors, the study examined perceived health risks of using General Snus and other tobacco and nicotine products and understanding of the risk reduction as stated in the modified risk claim. We already heard many of the details of the study. For the purposes of the objectives I just highlighted, it is important to note that participants were not shown the claim at any time during the study, as advised by the FDA, to avoid biasing participants in the study sample by providing them with information that they would not have had if they had not participated in the study. The key outcomes assessed in the Patterns of Use study include risk perceptions and understanding. The measures used to assess risk perception is shown here. Participants were asked about the chance that a person who only uses General Snus every day would suffer from heart disease, lung cancer, and mouth cancer. Participants were asked the same questions for a person who has never used tobacco or nicotine products, a person who only smokes cigarettes every day, only uses General Snus every day, and uses both cigarettes and General Snus every day. Participants rated their responses on a 5-point scale from very low chance to very high chance. Participants could also select don't know. The Patterns of Use study also assessed participants' understanding of the relative risk of General Snus compared to cigarettes with one item. Excuse me, can I get a chair to sit on?
Hey, can you sit down? Can you sit down? Hi, can you sit down? Yeah. Here, I got a chair right here. And here.
I can finish if I'm just sitting. assessed participants' understanding of the relative risk of general snus compared to cigarettes with one item. Participants completed the following sentence, which is their modified risk language verbatim. Using general snus instead of cigarettes, with one of 6 responses, puts you at lower risk of mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. Does not affect your risk, puts you at higher risk, none of the above, don't know, or decline to answer. Participants who responded correctly to the previous question that using general snus instead of cigarettes puts you at lower risk were then asked how many cigarettes, if any, you can smoke per day if using general snus instead of cigarettes to lower your risk of disease. Response options were 0 cigarettes, up to 5, up to 20, as many as you want to smoke, don't know, and decline to answer. This figure shows the distribution of responses to the first understanding question across the 4 waves of the study. Most general snus users at all waves correctly answered that using general snus instead of cigarettes puts you at lower risk for mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis, as shown by the light blue portion of the bars. Approximately 1/5 of participants at wave 4 did not understand that completely switching to general snus can reduce disease risk for a person who smokes cigarettes. There was a statistically significant increase in understanding from baseline to wave 3 among the subset of participants who completed both those waves. However, attrition was high across the general snus patterns of use study, and participants who completed waves 2, 3, and/or 4 were more likely to have responded correctly to this relative risk item at baseline compared to those who dropped out at each wave. Therefore, the longitudinal findings should be interpreted with caution. This figure shows participants' risk perceptions of general snus across 3 disease outcomes at baseline. Consumers generally viewed using general snus as having low but present health risks, particularly for mouth cancer and heart disease. For mouth cancer, 34.9% of participants perceived a low risk and 34.6% perceived a moderate risk. For heart disease, 39.1% perceived a low risk and 34.1% perceived a moderate risk. This is compared to the 13.1% and 18.1% who perceived a very low risk of suffering mouth cancer and heart disease, respectively, if one used general snus every day. Does not change to over the 4 waves of the study. Participants who correctly answered that using general snus instead of cigarettes puts you at lower risk of diseases were asked an item assessing whether users understand how to use the MRTP to reduce risk. This figure shows the distribution of responses to the item from waves 1 through 4. Participants were asked to select only one response. Most general snus users at all waves correctly answered this question, selecting that you can smoke 0 cigarettes per day if you were going to use general snus instead of cigarettes to lower your risk of diseases. This is shown in the light blue bars. There was a statistically significant increase in correct understanding from wave 1 to wave 2. Further supporting that general snus users understand how to use general snus to reduce their risk, at baseline and in each subsequent wave of the survey, participants correctly perceived dual use of cigarettes and general snus as more harmful than exclusive use of general snus across all 3 health outcomes. In summary, the general snus patterns of use study findings indicate accurate understanding of the modified risk claim. The applicant demonstrates that most study participants all of whom were people who used general snus at baseline, understood that using general snus instead of smoking cigarettes put them at lower risk of mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. Most participants perceived that using general snus every day carries some risk for some diseases. Most participants in the general snus patterns of use study understood that they could not use general snus with cigarettes and experienced the potential health benefits described in the modified risk claim. Further supporting consumer understanding of how to use the MRTP to reduce their risk, study participants accurately perceived dual use of general snus with cigarettes as more likely to cause mouth cancer, lung cancer, and heart disease than use of general snus alone. This concludes FDA's presentation of the renewal package. At this time, we are happy to answer any clarifying questions. And I have chocolate, so I will be okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to open it up now to clarifying questions. I do ask that folks focus their questions on clarifying questions about the content, because we will have time for discussion on the implications of the findings later. Donna?
Thank you, Donna Obson. I had a question. I heard you say that the gender question, people were excluded if they answered declined to answer or don't know on the gender question. And since we know in general that LGBTQIA+ people are at higher risk for tobacco dependence and complications, what was the reason for excluding people who may be gender nonconforming? Thank you.
I refer that to the applicant since that was their decision.
To be very candid, in hindsight, I wish we had not. I have a young daughter who's done a lot of education of this old man about these kinds of issues, and now more greatly appreciate it. I can assure you it was not willful or intentional in any way, and going forward, yeah, thanks.
Scout?
Was there any analysis done of the demographics of the PATH population to understand how that compared with the predominantly white male 36-year-old study population?
We did not do that. I don't believe the applicant did either. So no, unfortunately, we did not.
Lucy?
The epidemiological studies showing lower risk of snus all compare non-users or never cigarette smokers with cigarette smokers. Could you remind me if there have been studies where they look at people who switched and how the risks among those who switched compared to people who are cigarette users? And also, because I feel like the claim talks about switching and the benefits of this, but the epidemiological study only looks at never smokers, snus users versus smokers. But I might be totally wrong.
Yeah, so among the studies that we looked at, we did not identify anything that pertained to switching in that aspect. So, no.
Olivia?
I know the claim was authorized in October 2019. The baseline study was conducted in July 2020. Do you know if the claims were running at that baseline time?
They were running at that time? Yes. They were.
Annette?
Yes, thank you for your presentations. I have two questions, one a clarifying question. How many of the snus exclusive users at baseline began smoking?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can get back to you.
Okay. And then my second question is sort of related to those at the analyses related to the attrition of the study. Were there any considerations for multiple imputation or assumptions that users at wave one continued to use throughout all of the waves to provide estimates to that effect?
I do not believe there were.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Yeah, so the differences in cardiovascular mortality and stroke mortality were not as big as other diseases that are in the modified risk claim. I'm wondering if there's any literature out there about user understanding of those sort of health claims and being able to sort of parse the nuance of those kinds of things.
So you mean understanding in terms of like not as much reduced risk for heart disease as compared to other?
Well, so I'm just not sure that a member of the general population would see less risk for cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular mortality and think that that claim includes a significant risk but less risk. I'm just wondering how much understanding there is of those differences.
So I don't think, off the top of my head, in the applicant study, I don't think that they looked at whether there was maybe a reduced risk but still remaining some risk, right? I mean, we could compare that using the relative risk item that they asked about cigarettes relative to using snus. We did look some at comparing the absolute risk perception items for like dual using general snus with cigarettes, using general snus alone. And so those can provide some evidence of like if they have perceptions that there's still risk, but lower than cigarettes. So I don't think I can give a like fulsome response to your question, but we have looked at the evidence that is out there, and from the applicant study, we just have the absolute risk perceptions for various use patterns.
So I have one clarifying question, and if I missed this, I apologize, but did FDA evaluate if the 8 products changed at all over time?
We did not.
Let me just add that there isn't any evidence that the product's changed. Yeah, that would result in it being a new tobacco product.
Thanks, Ben. Lucy?
Just a quick clarifying question. You didn't measure any diseases, perceptions of risk of diseases that were not on the claim, like gum disease or something else where there might have been this halo effect?
Correct.
Last chance for clarifying questions? Okay. So now we're going to move into the open public hearing. I will first read the open public hearing statement, and then we will proceed with the individuals that have signed up to speak. So welcome to the open public hearing session. Please note that both the FDA and the public believe in a transparent process for information gathering and decision making. To ensure such transparency at the open public hearing session of the advisory committee meeting, FDA believes that it is important to understand the context of an individual's presentation. For this reason, FDA encourages you, the open public hearing speaker, at the beginning of your written or oral statement to advise the committee of any financial relationships that you may have with the sponsor, its products, and if known, its direct competitors. For example, this financial information may include the sponsor's payment of your travel, lodging, or other expenses in connection with your attendance at this meeting. Likewise, FDA encourages you at the beginning of your statement to advise the committee if you do not have such financial relationships. If you choose not to address this issue of financial relationship at the beginning of your statement, it will not preclude you from speaking. And with that, I'd like to invite our first open public hearing speaker, Tim Andrews.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So my name is Tim Andrews, and I'm here presenting on behalf of Americans for Tax Reform, a non-profit group that advocates on behalf of consumers and taxpayers. Our interest in this is on behalf of both consumers, where we believe consumers should have the right to access accurate information to make the choice to quit smoking through reduced risk products. And secondly, for taxpayers, where our interest is in the cost burden that will be saved on taxpayers through transitioning people from cigarette combustibles to reduced risk products. So those two reasons are why we are interested in this issue. And we strongly support the application for the renewal of the MRTP. And we do this for a number of reasons. First of all, there seems to be a very clear scientific consensus, which isn't in dispute, that these are reduced risk products. These are products that there are decades of information and scientific literature about. No new information has come in the last couple of years which would change the situation. All of the post-reporting by the applicant has met with FDA requirements. So purely from the protection of public health perspective, the APPH standard is met because it is very, very clear the scientific literature isn't in doubt that it will reduce tobacco-related mortality and morbidity. So I won't speak more about that, but rather I would urge the committees to concentrate on several things for consideration. The first is to not only look at population level data in the United States, but also look at the research that we have seen from abroad regarding this, particularly from Sweden, where the use of snus is responsible for essentially leading it to hit the below 5% population level smoking rates, which make it essentially a smoke-free country. The first in the Western world, or the developed world rather, that will achieve this. As a result, we have seen in Sweden the fact that it has some of the lowest cardiovascular, lung, and other illnesses directly attributed to public policy helping transition people to snus. Now, the question has arisen in previous discussions as to perhaps declining sales, whether this has been through a halo effect of other products or not. We would instead counteract this by saying that perhaps if there are problems with the MRTP process and accurate information not being given to consumers, although the consumers who purchase the product seemingly are very, very clearly aware, we've seen it from the previous presentation, but for people who aren't aware, that is where a question must be addressed, whether this be through the promotion and greater information from FDA about the benefits of MRTP and compelling misinformation, whether this be about changing the pathway to make other products less expensive for MRTP approval. It does not, however, negate the argument for renewal of the general snus MRTP application. The question before the committee in this session, and I think a great conversation later to be had, is how can we better increase understanding? But the question here is the APPH standard met? The answer is yes. Is there a problem with spillover effects such as youth usage? The answer is very, very clearly no. Is this something that meets the statutory and regulatory requirements for renewal? Yes. Have all of the postings been completed? Yes. So we would once again strongly support this renewal, and our only addition in the interest of taxpayers, consumers, the government, and public health. And we would only ask the committee to look at additional information as to the high levels of population level success that snus products have achieved in other countries, and how greater increasing public awareness through MRTP and other processes will lead to public health benefits. At that, I think I will end my presentation unless there are any further questions.
Thank you. I'd like to call Lindsay Stroud next.
Were people supposed to disclose tobacco industry funding before speaking or not?
Encouraged to do so.
Encouraged. Okay, thank you.
I'm calling again Lindy Strauss. Next presentation. Alex Clark. Pete Sepp.
Oh, I'm here. Sorry, can you hear me?
Is this Lindsay?
This is Lindsay, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Our Chairwoman, members of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee. Thank you for your time today. My name is Lindsay Stroud. I'm a senior fellow at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, or TPA. Regarding our financial ties to Swedish Match, that is above my pay grade. I just kind of do the numbers on tobacco and vapes. TPA has long advocated for adult access to less harmful alternatives to cigarettes, and we believe that the FDA's Modified Risk Tobacco Product Application, or MRTP, is essential for acceleration of tobacco harm reduction in America. Yet it is plagued by regulatory constraints inherent to the FDA's entire tobacco product application process, specifically products that must undergo the Pre-Market Tobacco Product Application, or PMTA. Swedish Match's portion snus products were the first ever products to be granted a marketing order through the PMTA process. The PMTA process itself requires that a product must be, quote, appropriate for the protection of public health. In issuing Swedish Match's order, the FDA determined that the PMTA application demonstrated that the new tobacco products would, quote, result in a low likelihood of new initiation, delayed cessation, or relapses. FDA also declared that Swedish Match's new products would, quote, likely provide less toxic options if current adult smokeless tobacco users use them exclusively. As emphasized in that order, the PMTA did not permit the manufacturer to advertise their product as reduced risk, even though the order itself found the product to be less toxic. Swedish Match would submit an MRTP application in 2014, and submitting the MRTP, the manufacturer submitted more than 100,000 pages of evidence, including governmental cohort studies and clinical trial results. The FDA would issue MRTP orders for 8 Swedish Match products in 2019, 4 years after issuing a PMTA order for their products and 5 years after first applying for MRTP status. One important tool to FDA tobacco regulation is post-market surveillance, including data provided by the manufacturer and governmental surveys on youth and adult tobacco product use. In recent years, when deciding applications for other tobacco products using the PMTA, FDA has repeatedly stated that youth use of certain products outweighed the benefits for adults. This is not the case with Swedish Match products or snus products. In fact, youth use of snus products is at record lows. The Monitoring the Future study conducted annually by the University of Michigan has been tracking snus use among U.S. youth in 8th, 10th, and 12th grades since 2012. That year, 5.7% of U.S. youth had reported past year use of snus. In 2023, only 1.1% of youth had used a snus product in the past year. This was a 30.6% decline from the previous year, as well as a whopping 80.2% decline from 2012. But there are still constraints in the regulatory process of bringing safer products to market, and it begins first with authorizing the product. Swedish Match was prohibited from relaying FDA's findings of reduced risk in the PMTA order and required to submit an additional application. Such processes are redundant and a waste of FDA Tobacco Center funding, all of which comes from tobacco product user fees. These processes also help to add to the growing misinformation epidemic among the public and healthcare professionals about the role of nicotine and smoking-related harms. A 2018 study examining a government health information survey of American adults found that 53% believe that nicotine is what caused most of the cancer related to smoking. A 2022 study, 3 years after Swedish Match's MRTP orders were given to them, an estimated 61.2% of adults who smoke believe that nicotine causes cancer. A 2020 Rutgers-led survey of more than 1,000 physicians determined that 80% of respondents believe it is nicotine that directly causes cancer. A 2023 global survey of more than 15,000 doctors found that 74% of participants incorrectly believe nicotine caused a range of illnesses from cancer to COPD. The MRTP process can help rectify this, but only if the FDA accelerates the authorization of more products through the PMTA pathway and permitting their marketing as reduced risk. To date, only 16 products have received MRTP orders, 15 of which went through the PMTA pathway. Half of those 16 MRTP orders are for products we are discussing today. This is wholly inefficient to adequately meet the needs of the tens of millions of U.S. adults who still smoke and are unaware of safer alternatives. In conclusion, Swedish Match's experience with snus highlights challenges and potential benefits of FDA's tobacco product regulatory pathways. Despite extensive evidence on snus's health effects, Swedish Match struggled to communicate reduced risk due to regulatory constraints. Further, the FDA's public education efforts on the risk continuum of tobacco products has been insufficient, causing confusion about nicotine's role and harm reduction. The FDA must balance rigorous oversight with practical measures to facilitate informed decision-making among U.S. consumers and reform the entire process to bring new, safer products to market, as well as inform consumers of their reduced risk. Again, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Pete Sepp?
May I ask another question? I just didn't hear the organization that she was representing or they were representing.
Lindsay, can you restate your organization?
Yes, Taxpayers Protection Alliance.
Thank you. Next up is Pete Sepp.
Yes, members of the committee, you honor me with your time today. I am here on behalf of National Taxpayers Union. Prior to this hearing announcement, I was wholly unfamiliar with Swedish Match or its snus product. We're not here, frankly, to profess a scientific expertise in snus or any other combustible tobacco alternative. Rather, we're interested in discussing, as was stated in your meeting announcement, program developments related to the conceptualization of consumer understanding, because consumer understanding is rooted, I think, and our organization believes, in taxpayer issues and the understanding of taxpayers about what's happening here. We've commented a great deal on PMTA, MRTP, other issues. I'd refer you to our written submission that we provided several days ago for more details on that. Let me confine my remarks today in the brief time we have to the taxpayer issue and how that's connected to consumer understanding. We believe that taxpayer-funded public health programs could fiscally benefit over the longer term by more products entering the market more quickly, and the overall net fiscal picture and the economic picture to consumers becomes clearer as a result. You know the research, you've seen that there are large effects that smoking exerts on the costs of Medicare, Medicaid, other government-funded health programs. The net fiscal impact is somewhat less clear when you take into account non-health programs, for example, longer lifespans and their impact on government retirement programs. How they offset each other has been a constant question among economic and scientific researchers. I would contend that one of the reasons we need to have a more smoothly functioning product approval process and getting these products to market is that the market itself can help to supplement some of TPSAC's very, very good work in scientifically researching the effects of these products. If you have these products to market more quickly and in greater abundance, consumer preferences and their understanding of the products will help to provide valuable feedback as to what might be working with smoking cessation. Once you do that, you can also bring in some of the other developments that are occurring throughout the healthcare sector. For example, the introduction of new pharmaceutical products that help to reduce comorbidities of smoking. We need to have a greater understanding of the net fiscal equation, not only in terms of revenues from smoking, revenues from people staying in the workforce, losses to healthcare programs from smoking, but also these potential new developments in healthcare that are going to affect the bottom line for taxpayers a great deal. You have a role in facilitating that kind of information. Second comment I would like to make is the application process in general needs greater certainty, transparency, and alacrity to encourage the development of and investment in new products. Not a surprise, many of witnesses here will say that. But how do we do it? There are 4 recommendations that were made by the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA in December 2022, all of them tied to greater collaboration and transparency with all of the stakeholders involved in this process, development of a strategic plan, a greater role in this committee in policymaking, hiring authorities, new fee authorities and reforms. But all of those things begin with better collaboration. How do we do that with all of the stakeholders involved? In our experience with other agency transformations, you can do several things here. You could adapt the job aid concept. That's under tax guidance right now, a collaborative process between regulators and the regulated to help understand each other's positions and concerns. That's adaptable for proceedings like these. You could create an ombudsman or an advocate for individuals involved in the MRTP or PMTA process. That's worked at the IRS. It's also worked at the Small Business Administration in creating a climate of trust and problem solving. You could also take a look at the regulatory sandbox concept. That has primarily been confined to financial services and technological innovations. But here again, that allows companies to test innovative products with regulators to basically try out theories of what works best in the regulatory space. A very productive shirt sleeve environment that I think has been very helpful in those areas. The third comment, participants in the process deserve value for the considerable regulatory costs and charges they have to bear in the process. That has a direct relationship to Reagan-Udall's recommendation on fee reform. We have found 3 principles that have to apply to fees. They've got to be proportionate to the cost and level of the service provided. They've got to be carefully managed and safeguarded from attempts to divert them to other programs. They have to be transparently managed and subject to regular oversight. Our written comments provide a number of examples of do's and don'ts, from the EPA's system, which has had a lot of problems, to FDA's user fee agreements governing pharmaceuticals, which seems to work fairly well, but even better models, for example, air traffic control that's practiced in other countries. All of these best practices can help to guide you and inform you going forward. And in doing so, you're going to make inroads toward consumer understanding while at the same time helping taxpayers to understand the costs and benefits of your own activities going forward. It was a pleasure being able to chat this morning, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Alex Clark.
Hi, hello. Just make sure the microphone is working.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. My name is Alex Clark. I'm the CEO of the Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives Association. CASA is a 501c4 nonprofit grassroots consumer advocacy group. I'm happy to be here on behalf of our 300,000 members from all walks of life. By way of disclosure, CASA does accept donations from industry. We have accepted a donation from PMI Global Services and their competitors. My salary and those funds are all, the use of those funds are decided by an all-volunteer board of directors to defend access to and maximize awareness of safer alternatives to smoking. First of all, I think we would like to align ourselves with some of the previous comments with regard to opening up the MRTP process, making it more accessible to other companies. We need to see more of these products on the market. People who smoke certainly need to be made more aware of the safer alternatives that they have access to. By way of sort of personal story, the region in which I live, north of the Adirondacks, the North Country of New York, when I go and search on Swedish Match's website, I see one retailer in my area that carries General Snus. And so this is an area where it's a relatively low income. Smoking prevalence is higher than the rest of the state. Youth vaping is higher than the rest of the state, higher than the national average. This is grizzly and pickup truck country. And so if there was a region of the state, of the country, that needed to see these modified risk statements, it is where I live. And I was actually struck by, knowing going into this, having spoken in support of Swedish Match's original modified risk application, that the messages would be so strictly limited to existing Swedish Match customers, to see the walkthrough of just how many steps someone has to go through in order to see this message on Swedish Match's website. It makes it clear that more has to be done to reach a wider audience of people who smoke and inform them of what their options are in terms of low-risk products. So I may have skipped this at the beginning, but we are here to speak in support of renewing the modified risk orders and looking forward to the discussion later this afternoon about ways that Swedish Match can sort of open up the promotion and reach a broader audience. And we think that reaching an audience of people, not just people who smoke or people who are currently using Swedish Match products, is important and consistent with FDA's recent commitments to realign perceptions of risk associated with nicotine. This is not something that should be limited to just tobacco consumers. The general public needs to be made aware of this. A lot of the encouragement or advice that we receive when we transition from smoking to a smoke-free product comes from friends and family and neighbors. And so it's, I think, to everybody's benefit that we have broad awareness of low-risk products. In addition to that, in conclusion, I think we would like to encourage the FDA to do more to draw attention to the existence of modified risk tobacco products. Certainly, we don't expect the agency to endorse any particular brand or product, but now that these products are out there and the messages have been authorized and reviewed, and according to what we're seeing from Swedish Match's post-market surveillance materials, perceptions are going in the correct direction. I think FDA can absolutely do more in terms of educating the public about the availability of these products and the benefits for people who smoke to switch to them. Thank you very much, and we look forward to this afternoon's discussion.
Thank you. For folks participating virtually, we're asking that you please turn off your cameras because the virtual participants are only audio. We do not see you here in the room. So next up is Yael
Osowski. Yes, thank you. So my name is Yael Osowski. I'm Deputy Director of the advocacy group Consumer Choice Center. We champion the benefits of freedom of choice, innovation, and abundance in everyday life. I think I have three main points. Options matter, science-based policy matters, and more bountiful choices to consumers matter who would like to make healthier choices. I think the last time that I spoke at an FDA scientific advisory meeting, it was around May 2019, and it was around regulatory questions on cannabis and CBD products. And actually, much of what I say today will be very similar. At the time, we had argued for clear labeling standards, sensible age restrictions, a process for actually having and marketing provable health or risk claims, and a diverse set of product types to reduce harm and to avoid combustible products. You can see that being very relevant today. So the reduced risk or modified risk classification that is considered for renewal today is something we obviously support. It's been well studied, explained, and explored thanks to many of the presentations given earlier. And we can see that we're very grateful to have that, particularly in this conversation, and is a great venue and forum for doing so. So I do thank a lot of those presentations that we heard from earlier today. As someone who grew up in the South, the rural areas there's a lot of moist chewing tobacco. There's a lot of spit bottles. I kind of saw that growing up, and I'm actually very delighted that we now have a very mature market for a smokeless, safer product that does have demonstrated reduced risk. And we have that via snus. That's because of the innovative processes of entrepreneurs in Sweden, Scandinavia, and Europe, and elsewhere. And I think that this process, the MRT process, is an important part of allowing that information to be shared, spread widely, and understood by consumers. So the only things that we'll highlight is that this scientifically minded reduced risk protocol is really necessary. And we think particularly when it comes to marketing, consumers need to have access to that information. We're inundated every day with social media. We're inundated every day with different news organizations, television, radio. And if we're able to get actually good scientifically based information, not only from our policymakers and bodies such as this, but whenever we buy certain products and we know that they will actually be better for us, we think that is a great thing. At the same time, we should be able to spread awareness about some of the other less harmful nicotine alternatives to combustible tobacco, things like nicotine pouches, snus like we're talking about today, gums, lozenges. I mean, there's all kinds of different innovation that's happening there, and I think we very much support that. We love to see more approvals of these reduced risk products, more renewals of risk modification orders. I think this would be very beneficial for millions of Americans and certainly public health overall, not to mention the large cost savings we could have. And we can already see from examples such as Sweden, which has an exemption in the European Union to sell snus. They do have the lowest incidence of cancers related to this. I think this is something that is an important data point that we'll continue to repeat because we are seeing the benefits, particularly for younger people who are in Sweden. They're not having to lose their fathers or their grandmothers at an elder age because of products that they use or combustible tobacco. I think that in itself is very powerful testimony. So in closing, I just want to say again that this forum, along with the input from all of the experts who are testifying or people who gave presentations today are very important. They give a lot of dividends to consumers who can really benefit from that choice, particularly of reduced risk products. So we believe options matter, scientific-based policy matters, and more bountiful choices. And it was true on products such as cannabis and CBD, and we hope the conversation continues to move on that front. And it also applies here in the case of snus. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Stan Glantz.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Stan.
Okay, yeah, we've been having a little technical problems, but they just solved it 1 second ago. So my name is Stanton Glantz. I'm a retired professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And I have no financial connections to the tobacco industry or any of the organizations it supports directly or indirectly. I'm here to urge the committee to recommend against the FDA authorizing the renewal of the MRTP. I think that the application has not met the legal standard of demonstrating that as actually used, and the as actually used is very important. The snus product is actually appropriate for the protection of public health and reducing harm. The application does not really adequately deal with the issue of dual use. A sizable fraction of snus users, somewhere probably between 1/3 and 2/3, depending on the survey that you look at, are dual users, and dual use actually increases the risks of a variety of diseases above smoking alone. That point is not treated at all in the application or in the risk model. The second problem is that the question which was used to assess perception the question that was used to assess whether or not people understand what switching completely means was very poorly worded. It basically asked about using snus and cigarettes on the same day. Many dual users do not use the two products on the same day. They use them on some days. And the standard definitions which are used for dual use are use of the both of the two products within the past 30 days. Another problem is that the survey itself is not a representative national sample. It was a convenience sample of customers, as the FDA mentioned. I didn't hear the whole presentation, but there was very high attrition. And so in order to really assess whether or not the product will be appropriate for the protection of public health, the analysis needs to be based on a representative sample. And so those are reasons that I strongly urge the panel to recommend against renewing the MRTP. I also urge the panel to specifically tell the FDA that they should not exercise enforcement discretion and allow the company to continue making the current claim while they revise their application in an effort to deal with these problems. The tobacco companies have really been given a free pass with the exercise of enforcement discretion for years while the FDA thinks about these applications. Finally, I'd just like to comment that the previous speakers all came from organizations that, as far as I know, have collaborated with and often have some kind of financial connection to the tobacco industry, and none of them even mentioned that. And I think it's very important that TPSAC and the FDA carefully assess direct and indirect connections with the manufacturers when assessing the independence and objectivity of the statements that you've heard so far this morning. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Denny Hennigan.
Thank you. My name is Dennis Hennigan. I'm Vice President for Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. I have no financial connection whatsoever with the sponsor or the tobacco industry. I want to thank FDA and TPSAC for this opportunity to speak with you today. I want to address an issue that is relevant not only to the Swedish Match renewal application, but to all modified risk applications. And that is the role of TPSAC itself in these proceedings. In an October 2020 letter to then CTP Director Zeller, my organization and 5 other public health organizations expressed the view that FDA had relegated TPSAC to a role in modified risk proceedings that is inconsistent with the letter and spirit of the Tobacco Control Act. And I believe that conclusion remains valid today. I start with the text of the statute. It not only requires FDA to refer every modified risk application to TPSAC, but also provides that not later than 60 days after referral, TPSAC, quote, shall report its recommendation on the application to FDA. Now, the final decision to issue or deny a modified risk order certainly rests with FDA. But it seems clear from this statutory language that no modified risk application may be acted on by FDA without TPSAC making recommendations on whether to grant or deny the application and on the scientific issues necessary to make that determination. To date, TPSAC has held 5 meetings to consider modified risk applications. FDA has yet to ask TPSAC to make a recommendation on the disposition of any of these applications. It also appears that TPSAC's role has increasingly been marginalized, as reflected in the number of scientific issues which have been subject to votes by the committee as opposed to simply general discussion. In TPSAC's first modified risk meeting in April of 2015, which concerned these very general snus products, TPSAC took votes on 10 scientific questions. In its next 2 modified risk meetings to consider the IQOS system and Camel snus products, TPSAC took votes on 9 issues and 8 issues, respectively. But in the last 2 meetings, in February 2019 and February 2020, which addressed 3 different products, TPSAC voted on only 1 issue. So it's apparent that TPSAC's role has evolved from being asked by FDA to vote on key scientific issues to simply being a discussion forum on those issues. And I didn't see any votes on the agenda for today's meeting either. Now, this is in stark contrast to the role of other FDA advisory committees, which routinely vote on the ultimate regulatory issue of whether a product should be approved. Earlier this month, for example, an advisory committee voted to recommend approval of an Alzheimer's drug as safe and effective. I realize that the role of FDA advisory committees in general is subject to debate, as revealed in FDA's recent listening session on this subject. But the particular role of TPSAC in modified risk proceedings should give due regard to considerations unique to tobacco regulation, including the mandatory statutory role of TPSAC and the history of public health harm from tobacco products marketed with claims of lower risk to health than other tobacco products. Since taking over as CTP Director, Dr. King has repeatedly and appropriately made clear that FDA decision-making is to be guided by the science He reiterated that again today. The best way to make that happen in modified risk proceedings is to ensure that CTP's independent scientific advisors are given the opportunity to clearly communicate their collective judgments on the science to FDA and to the public at large. And that has not been happening. Thank you so much.
Next speaker is Guy Bentley.
Good morning, everyone. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I know it's been a long morning and a long day. My name is Guy Bentley. I'm Director of Consumer Freedom at the Reason Foundation. And if you'd like any information about the sources of where we're funded, we publish all funders who wish to disclose their funding to us in the end-of-year issue of Reason magazine, which we also publish. At Reason Foundation, we are committed to ensuring that smokers who wish to quit using cigarettes have access to the broadest possible range of reduced-risk products and information that can help them make the best decision to improve their health. To be granted an MRTP, as we've heard, the applicant must show that products in question significantly reduce harm and the risk of tobacco-related disease to individual tobacco users and benefit the health of the population as a whole, taking into account both users of tobacco products and persons who do not currently use tobacco products. Since the applicant was granted these MRTP status back in 2019, the underlying science and epidemiology have remained unchanged, demonstrating that snus is significantly safer than combustible cigarettes and that smokers who switch to snus exclusively will improve their health. The claims also are authorized by FDA remain true today and provide consumers with accurate and valuable information about the benefits of using snus instead of cigarettes. Access to accurate information about the benefits of switching exclusively from cigarettes to snus benefits public health today and continue to do so if this MRTP is renewed. As the applicant has demonstrated, the overwhelming majority of general snus users both understand the claims being made in their MRTP and accurately perceive the messages being communicated. A significant portion of users transition to exclusive general snus use, and a larger proportion of dual users that we heard about earlier do significantly reduce their cigarette consumption, which is also similar for what we see for FDA-approved smoking cessation products such as nicotine replacement therapies. Furthermore, since the MRTP was granted in 2019, we see no evidence of general snus reaching unintended audiences, especially youth who do not use tobacco products. Critics of the original application in 2019, one specifically heard earlier, Professor Stanton Glantz, specifically wrote and hypothesized that the granting of the original MRTP would increase positive perceptions of general snus amongst tobacco-naive youth and therefore increase use amongst tobacco-naive youth. But this hypothesis has not been borne out in the real world as the product has actually been used and marketed. There has been no significant increase in the overall snus market, as we heard earlier, and even the smokeless tobacco market as a whole. Amongst adults, it has been relatively flat in terms of use, and in terms of youth use, current high school use of all smokeless tobacco products, including snus, fell from 4.8% in 2019 when the MRTP was granted to 1.5% in 2023. And snus users are likely to be an even smaller portion of this category, and among smokeless tobacco youth users, use is exclusively confined to white and Hispanic males. The applicant's conservative use of the MRTP authorization is likely to have severely limited its positive impact on communicating with consumers, but still we do see benefits to those currently using general snus in terms of their perception of the relative risk of using general snus. The FDA could work with the applicant to further develop effective communication in order to reach the population that would most benefit, while limiting the reach so as not to appeal to unintended audiences. One of CTP's goals outlined in its strategic plan is to educate adults who smoke about the relative risks of tobacco products. If this MRTP renewal is rejected, it will severely undermine CTP's goal and further impede efforts to reduce the burden of smoking-related disease. We urge the committee to consider the negative ramifications of denying this renewal. The science of relative risk is clear and overwhelming. The MRTP's impact has been positive, if small, and no identifiable harms stemming from the original authorization exist. Therefore, there is no reason why it should not be renewed. If this suite of products can't gain the overwhelming support of TPSAC and the FDA, the utility and validity of the MRTP as a pathway to communicate accurate information about reduced risk products should be reconsidered. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Pam Ling.
Hello, good morning. Good morning. I'm Dr. Pam Ling. I'm professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and director of the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education and principal investigator of the UCSF course. I have no financial ties to tobacco companies. Thank you for the opportunity to highlight a few important points from our 2 public comments demonstrating that FDA should not renew the MRTP order for General Snus. First, Swedish Match did not demonstrate that General Snus, as used by consumers, are appropriate for the protection of public health. This means Swedish Match needs to present scientific evidence that these products, as actually used by consumers, will benefit the health of the population as a whole, weighing any potential benefit to users who might switch from cigarettes to snus against the harms to non-users, including kids who may initiate tobacco use with General Snus, or those using it with other tobacco products, such as cigarettes, e-cigarettes, or nicotine pouches. Our January 2019 comment showed that the scientific study submitted by Swedish Match in 2018 to support its initial MRTP application, and which it also relies on to support this request for renewal, did not demonstrate that the modified risk claim was communicated properly or understood by consumers. The wording used in that study to test whether consumers understand the claim asked, for General Snus to put you at lower risk of disease, how many cigarettes can you smoke on a day when you also use General Snus? The wording of the question is problematic because it implies using General Snus on some days while continuing to smoke on other days is compatible with complete switching. Only between 37 and 56% of the participants selected the correct answer, which is 0 cigarettes. The General Snus Patterns of Use study that Swedish Match submitted in December 2023 did not address these deficiencies and includes several other study design flaws. The study relies on a non-representative, convenient sample of a highly selected population of General Snus purchasers that does not represent cigarette smokers in general. The study was further biased by poor rates of follow-up and eliminated many respondents for unclear reasons. Even in this sample of enthusiastic snus users, 12 to 14% of respondents co-used General Snus with cigarettes, and dual use and perceptions of the safety of dual use was not addressed in the Swedish Match study. Most important, the Swedish Match study completely ignored the key question of whether the authorized MRTP claim caused any cigarette smokers to switch completely and whether that switching was counterbalanced by dual use, less cessation, or snus uptake among non-smokers. Dual use is even more important now because Philip Morris International is co-marketing Swedish Match General Snus with its nicotine pouch ZYN. For example, the General Snus website suggests you purchase from the northerner.com website, where they are co-marketed as companion products to use in different situations, stating if you're craving tobacco, use snus. If you need a nicotine kick while you're at work, in school, or in transit, use ZYN pouches. Because PMI co-markets General Snus products with ZYN, consumers are likely to be confused and believe that ZYN is authorized to be sold in the US, despite the fact that FDA has not granted ZYN PMTA or MRTP authorization. Both ZYN and General Snus come in mint flavors that are popular with kids, facilitating further interchanging mint snus for mint ZYN. In summary, continued marketing of General Snus with the MRTP claims is not appropriate for the protection of public health. FDA should deny Swedish Match's renewal application because, 1, Swedish Match did not demonstrate consumers understand they must use General Snus exclusively instead of cigarettes to get the purported health benefits. 2, the consumer perception studies Swedish Match relied on for both its initial MRTP application and the current renewal application were flawed. 3, Swedish Match presented no support for the claim that among the general population, existing adult users of tobacco products will switch completely to General Snus. 4, Swedish Match studies did not address co-use of snus with other tobacco products. And finally, Swedish Match's co-marketing of General Snus with Zyn pouches is problematic and raises questions of public health, especially for youth. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, Pam. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher.
Hello, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher, and I'm a professor of pediatrics at Stanford University. I'm a developmental psychologist with additional training in adolescent and young adult health. I have over 30 years of experience researching why youth use tobacco with a focus on risk perceptions, decision-making, product standards, and marketing, as well as tobacco prevention and education. I have no ties to tobacco companies. The FDA should not renew the modified risk granted order for the 8 Swedish Match General Snus modified risk tobacco product applications for General Snus products because, as actually used by consumers, these products will not benefit the health of the population as a whole, which is the standard to be met here. Swedish Match's July 17, 2023 MRTP renewal request relies in part on its argument that General Snus products are still not appealing to youth, claiming that marketing General Snus with the authorized MRTP claim is a benefit to the population as a whole, considering non-users such as kids as well as users. However, these assertions have not been justified. They're not accurate. In fact, the 2023 National Youth Tobacco Survey data showed that 800,000 middle and high school students have ever used smokeless tobacco products, with 330,000 current, defined as past 30-day users. So while smokeless tobacco use is certainly less popular than cigarettes or e-cigarette use amongst teens, it's still happening. We still see young people using smokeless tobacco, and our own data even show that such use is increasing. The National Youth Tobacco Survey data confirm that dual use of smokeless tobacco along with other tobacco products is a significant problem, especially among kids. As such, smokeless tobacco use among teens is still something we and the FDA should in fact still worry about. In its July 2023 renewal request letter, Swedish Match uses FDA's March 2023 authorization of the U.S. smokeless tobacco company's Copenhagen Classic Snuff as a modified risk tobacco product as support for the authorization of General Snus as a modified risk product. However, they failed to mention, such as our own research published in the Journal of Adolescent Health in September 2023, showing that exposure to the Copenhagen Snuff MRTP claim actually increases interest in moist snuff among adolescents. Specifically, in our study, we showed that for California adolescents, they were randomized to view a Copenhagen Snuff image with or without the MRTP reduced risk claim. We found that adolescents exposed to the MRTP claim were less likely to perceive smokeless tobacco to cause, quote, a lot of harm. We also showed that among adolescents who were past 30-day users of at least one nicotine product, which was predominantly e-cigarettes, viewed the MRTP claim actually increased their willingness to try moist snuff. These findings suggest that smokeless tobacco MRTP claims increase interest in using smokeless tobacco use among, increase their interest in using smokeless tobacco for youth. An increased susceptibility to smokeless tobacco use among youth is likely to harm public health, especially since Swedish Match provided no evidence that the MRTP claims increase the interest in switching to smokeless tobacco among adult users. Swedish Match's MRTP request letter states that evidence annually submitted by the company since 2015 continues to demonstrate that there's no significant youth initiation of General Snus. However, that evidence has been redacted from the renewal request. Further, Swedish Match contends that they provided evidence demonstrating correct consumer perception of the risks. However, the purported evidence from their post-market studies and annual reporting is also heavily redacted. As I published on before, while we do not believe that the tobacco industry should be allowed to enroll youth in their studies, I, along with other scientists, and in fact, people from Tobacco Free Kids, we published a study in 2020 saying that there are safe and effective ways in which the FDA can conduct their own research or fund others to do so, to really look at the MRTP or PMT process with youth in its decision-making. So in summary, it's really important to note that smokeless tobacco and, the other issue is co-marketing, as others have said, that we're very concerned that General Snus is also being co-marketed with Zyn as well, and that when things are co-marketed, you think that both are authorized and both are safe. So in summary, FDA should not renew the Swedish Match MRTP order because smokeless tobacco and dual use of smokeless tobacco with other products is still popular among youth. Our own research mentioned today, as well as other studies, show that teens exposed to MRTP claims for smokeless tobacco products actually increases their interest in using those products. There's no evidence that youth correctly perceive or understand the risks associated with these products. And finally, co-marketing mint flavored General Snus with mint and other flavored Zyn also presents a serious public health issue. We are very worried about the flavors as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last open public hearing speaker will be Diana Zuckerman.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Diana Zuckerman, president of the National Center for Health Research. Our center is a nonprofit public health think tank that scrutinizes the safety and effectiveness of medical and consumer products, and we do not accept funding from companies that make those products. Our largest program focuses on cancer prevention and treatment. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views today. My expertise is based on my current work, as well as my postdoctoral training in epidemiology and public health, and as a former faculty member and researcher at Yale and Harvard. I've also previously served as professional staff in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, and at the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm a founding board member of the nonprofit Alliance for a Stronger FDA, which educates Congress about the need to financially support the essential work of the FDA. The question today is whether General Snus should continue to be labeled as safer than other tobacco products. I will focus on the scientific evidence, which I personally found challenging due to lack of some key information. So I will raise the questions that were not a focus of the FDA review, and I respectfully encourage you to try to get the answers to those questions today. I'm glad to see that panel members and previous speakers have asked some of these questions already. We all know that the risks of smoking include cancer, lung disease, and cardiovascular diseases, but equally important, most smokers start smoking as children or teenagers, and most of these diseases are diagnosed decades later, usually when the individuals are in their 50s or 60s or even later. And so that's more than 30 years later, often 40 or 50 years later, sometimes even later than that. And in contrast, the data being discussed today found, number one, a significant increase in several serious cardiovascular diseases, and these were diagnosed in studies that followed relatively young white men. For example, the Araji study, published in 2022, included 9 million person years of study, which sounds very impressive, but it averaged 22 years of follow-up, and that included some individuals that were followed for only 5 years, and that really messes up the data. So those results indicate that some serious risks that are apparently evident at a younger age than are found with cigarettes. Number two, there was no increase found in oral cancers, despite previous evidence that smokeless tobacco causes oral cancers. However, oral cancers usually develop in people in their 50s or older, and many of the individuals in these studies were considerably younger than that. So my question is whether the follow-up for these individuals in any of these studies is long enough to draw conclusions about oral cancer. In addition, the information provided in previous research indicate that snus in Sweden differs from the snus that's sold in the United States. And of course, the people are also different and have other different health habits. And therefore, the data provided on Swedish consumers may differ from the impact on US consumers. And I hope you will ask that question. The bottom line is, how good is the evidence that using the General Snus sold in the United States is safer than smoking cigarettes in either the shorter term, meaning about 10 to 20 years, or the longer term, which could be 30, 40, or even 50 years. Number two, how often do General Snus users also use other tobacco products or switch to other tobacco products? Apparently, the answer is they often do. So does the nicotine in General Snus make it more difficult to quit tobacco use and instead result in continued use of snus and other tobacco products? And last, can the information available be understood by teenagers or adults who consider using snus if it has a modified risk claim, since that would be perceived as a seal of approval by the FDA? All I can say is I had trouble understanding it. I had trouble drawing conclusions because there are so many unanswered questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. So we're actually going to break now for lunch, but we are going to reconvene at 1:15, not 1:30, so that we have sufficient time for discussion.